Chapter 1137. At the same time, in the eastern region of the swirling sea, a large fleet of ships formed into 5 columns and floated outside the Shadow Islands. The most eye-catching ship was the Snow Wind. Its black steel hull and billowing black smoke distinguished it from the rest of the ships. At this moment, the deck of the Snow Wind was bustling with activity. The sailors were running back and forth, making the final preparations for entering the islands. Thunder was on the bridge, explaining to the crew what to pay attention to. You're all the best explorers in the fjords, and many of you have come to the Shadow Seas before. So, I'll cut to the chase. The position of the islands is unpredictable, and there will be fog when the tide falls. So, you can't let your guard down at any time. Do you understand? Don't worry, boss. An adjutant patted his chest and said, "We've been with you for so many years. When have we ever made a mistake? It's the 4 major chambers of commerce that sent a large ship to follow us. If anything goes wrong, it'll be them." That's right. It's fine if it's just a few small ships, but a 3-masted ship is not a good choice to sail in the reefs. They probably think their ships are as agile as the Snow Wind. Don't expect us to turn around if we hit a reef. This caused everyone to burst into laughter. If they're worried that we'll hide our findings, why don't they just let the captain hitch a ride with us? Those chambers of commerce are clearly trying to gain a greater say in this expedition, Zhang Heng said. I told you it's not easy to get funding from them. But if we want to go further east, we have to have a large fleet. There's no other way. Looking at the noisy crowd, Camilla Derry sighed softly. During the nearly month-long voyage, she had gained a basic understanding of the Shadow Seas. It seemed to be the center of the swirling sea. Every tide rose and fell here, and it was also the most obvious part of the sea. The difference between the front and the back could even turn thousands of submerged reefs into an archipelago. The sleeping island was nothing compared to it. What was even more incredible was that the Shadow Islands had been discovered for more than 10 years, but there was still no accurate nautical chart. The reason was that the reefs here were not fixed. All the objects hidden in the water seemed to be constantly moving, including the huge ruins. If they wanted to cross the sea, they must wait until all the reefs were out of the water. It was precisely because of this that the difficulty of navigating it could be imagined. But the people in front of him didn't look like well-trained professionals at all. Instead, they looked more like fierce bandits. The identity of an explorer did have a good reputation among the people of the fjords, but she could not see this among her peers. Except for a few people like Thunder who could convince the masses, most of them were the masters of their own ways. Camilla, who used to be a noble, was naturally disgusted by such a chaotic scene. If it were not for Princess Tilly's request, she really did not want Joan to travel with them. While sighing, she found that she actually missed the first army of Neverwinter. At least they did not make a fuss like monkeys during a mission. No matter what, they always stood straight and in high spirits, which was always pleasing to the eye. Camilla suppressed the discomfort in her heart, left the bridge command room, and went to the rear deck of the steel ship. She immediately saw Joan, who was playing at the stern of the ship, and Margaret, who was by her side. Seeing Camilla, Joan immediately shrank behind Karina and looked at her with only half of her head. She had heard that Joan had been able to get along with many witches in Neverwinter and had even made friends with Maggie and Lightning. Camilla could not help but think, is it so difficult for me to be recognized? In terms of the time they had known each other, she could be considered the person who had interacted with him the most after Marjorie. Karina smiled. What's wrong? Are you in a bad mood? She pointed at the corner of her mouth. It's all over your face. Camilla was stunned. You don't like the atmosphere in the command room, do you? Marjorie seemed to know what was on Camilla's mind. I've already told you, let those men worry about the exploration. You just focus on enjoying the scenery on the sea and treat it as a trip. How can I do that? Camilla frowned. If I stay out of everything, won't I be putting my life in their hands? Don't you trust Thunder? Marjorie took Camilla's hand and walked to the railing. Your sense of responsibility is admirable. I think if not, Lady Tilly wouldn't have let you manage Sleeping Island. But sometimes, it's not bad to trust others. Not only Thunder, But also Lady Tilly. How can I not trust Her Highness Tilly? Camilla thought to herself, but found it difficult to refute. She had always disagreed with the idea of the witches moving to Neverwinter. Besides, staying on the sea for a long time will drive you crazy if you're always tense, Marjorie continued. Don't be fooled by the fact that they look like a bunch of uneducated bandits. They're really good at sailing. Camilla finally found a way to speak. I have to clarify that I didn't say that, but you think so, don't you? Karina's words soon made her speechless. Haha, it's nothing strange. The nobles of the Four Kingdoms see us as barbarians, just like we see the Sand Nation of the Majin Kingdom as barbarians. To be honest, I've only met one noble who doesn't discriminate at all, or the reason for discrimination has nothing to do with his family background. Roland Wimbledon. Although she did not want to admit it, that was the only name she could think of. After all, that person had publicly offered to help the witches as early as 4 years ago. Camilla had previously thought that he might have some ulterior motives, but now, that excuse no longer existed, because the witch he had saved had become the Queen of Grey Castle. A little more trust? Just when Camilla was silent, a faint muffled sound suddenly came from the distance, as if a huge wave was sweeping towards them, or as if countless schools of fish were tumbling restlessly on the surface of the sea. However, she knew it was just her illusion. At the moment, as far as she could see, the sea was still calm. The tide is starting to ebb, Marjorie said in a low voice. Joan nervously grabbed the corner of Karina's clothes. After a quarter of an hour, Camilla saw a change. A sharp stone emerged from the sea, followed by a second and a third. Rather than calling it an archipelago, it was more appropriate to call it a stone forest. They were slowly rising from the water and soon occupied a large area of the sea. When the water fell more than 5 meters, the thicker islands under the stone pillars gradually revealed themselves. Camilla could not help but hold her breath. It was the first time she had seen such an incredible scene. As the entire sea was falling, the sea line at the end of her vision floated, as if it had risen above the archipelago. But that was just a visual error. To be precise, it was a slope. The original sea line had become the top of the slope, while the shadow waters had become a slightly sloping slope. Even so, there were still no waves on the surface of the sea. If she covered her ears and looked back, it could still be described as calm. Chapter 1138. Woo, woo, the snow wind also sounded its deep whistle at this moment. It was the signal to set sail. The 4 ships at the head of the column hoisted their sails and separated themselves from the fleet. Crescent Moon Bay, Sunset Island, Shallow Water Town, Twin Dragon Island. The ships of the 4 chambers of commerce followed the snow wind and sailed slowly toward the Shadow Sea. The clear view gradually became blurred, and the sunlight dimmed. Although they were only about a kilometer away, they felt like they had entered a completely different world. When the deck was shrouded in mist, Camilla felt the vibration of the ship stopped. What happened? Don't worry. The engine just stopped working. Margaret seemed to have seen through her doubts. The most important trick to sailing here is to be slow. If it's a small boat, it's fine. If it's a big boat, it's enough to glide along the water slope. Look behind. Camilla looked in the direction Marjorie was pointing. The sails of the ships of the Chamber of Commerce were lowered to half-mast, and some of the sails were facing each other, which was a scene that could never be seen on a normal sailing. In addition, there was a burning brazier set up in front and behind each ship to mark their position. But even so, she could only see the traces of 2 ships. The silhouette of the 3rd ship was completely hidden in the fog, and the weak flames were like flickering fireflies. The 4th ship seemed to have completely disappeared. Are we going downhill? Camilla asked suspiciously. After staying on Sleeping Island for a while, Camilla was no longer ignorant about the sea. When the high water swallowed the caves and cracks, whirlpools would appear on the surface of the water. The smaller whirlpools were as thick as a finger, while the bigger ones could be several meters long. In any case, the water would gather at the center of the whirlpool from all directions, and the closer they were to the end, the faster the water would gather. Camilla had thought that the sea was too vast to feel the changes in the current. However, Now that the fleet had entered the depths of the Shadow Sea, it was strange that the water was still so calm. She even saw the algae floating on the surface of the water drifting out of the sea. This meant that the direction of the current had not changed at all. There was no sign of the current turning back, let alone converging at the bottom of the slope. It does look incredible, but it's the truth. Marjorie nodded. If the ebb tide was caused by a huge whirlpool, we wouldn't even think about exploring it. This was because a whirlpool that could affect the entire ocean was probably even deeper than the abyss of hell. Entering it would only lead to death. It's because it's so strange that Thunder wants to explore it. She paused and looked at Joan, who was gazing at the sea blankly. But there's a limit to our ability. It's almost impossible to dive to the bottom of the sea. It's because of your help that we can see hope. Having said that, Camilla felt a chill down her spine as she looked at the wet stone pillars and reefs around her. She could at least see the real shape of the rocks that were close by, but for the reefs that were further away, she could only see the dark shadows of different depths, just like the claws of a ghost in a nightmare. Cry, fish, redfish. Joan suddenly yelled. Camilla turned her head and saw a bright red river suddenly appearing on the right quarter of the snow wind. Although Thunder had told her about it, she was still shocked when she saw it with her own eyes. Ghost Shadow Red River. Ghost Shadow Red River. It was a special channel formed by a school of fish. Stop smacking your lips. Red-scaled fish don't taste good. Marjorie patted Joan's head. As long as we follow the Ghost Shadow Red River, we'll reach the ruins of the triangular tower. Princess Tilly must have told you that there's a strange instrument in the ruins that looks like a telescope. Through it, we can see a vast continent that we've never seen before. That's our final destination. She did tell me about it. It's a pity that our current destination has nothing to do with the ancient ruins. Otherwise, you would be able to experience the magnificence and wonder of the ruins, Karina said regretfully. No. I'd better not, Camilla said decisively. If she could, she would never set foot in this sea again. Your reaction is completely different from Princess Tilly's, Marjorie said, covering her mouth with her hand and laughing. After sailing for about 2 hours, the snow wind stopped beside a large reef, followed by the 3-masted ships of the 4 major chambers of commerce. After the ships were anchored, the people in charge of the 4 major chambers of commerce gathered on the deck of the flagship. No one is missing, the adjutant of the snow wind said, twitching his mouth. I thought you would drive the ship onto a reef and cry for help. You're not the only good captains and sailors. The people of the 4 major chambers of commerce would not pretend that they did not hear that. The steel ships are good, but the people on them are not. That's enough. Thunder interrupted the argument. It's already the best result that we can get here safely. Did we encounter any danger on the way? No, the people in charge of the chambers of commerce said. It was very quiet this time. We didn't even encounter a single sea ghost. I thought it was strange too. Usually, 1 or 2 unlucky people would be dragged into the water by the sea ghosts. Or did we choose a route that avoided the ancient ruins and those monsters prefer to use the ruins as their nests? That sounds reasonable. Thunder pondered for a moment and then waved his hand to silence the people. If that's the case, let's not waste any more time. The ebb tide will last until evening, so we'd better go to the bottom of the sea before then. If we don't find anything, we must leave before the tide rises. Otherwise, we'll be trapped in the archipelago. He looked at the 2 witches and said, Joan, Lady Camilla, I'll leave the rest to you. Yeah. Joan nodded seriously. As long as you can shut them up. Camilla glanced at the explorers grumpily. Just to be clear, I need to concentrate when I'm communicating telepathically. If anyone interrupts me, don't blame me for not doing it again. After receiving Thunder's promise, Camilla put her hand on Joan's shoulder and closed her eyes. After a moment of dizziness, another image appeared in front of her. It was Joan's vision. Go, Camilla said in her heart. If the communication is interrupted or you encounter any danger, you must come back immediately. Do you understand? Don't force yourself. Your friends are waiting for you. When Camilla mentioned the word friends, she clearly felt a slight tremble in Joan's heart. Then she became determined. Got it. Joan then jumped back into the sea. A cool and comfortable feeling immediately enveloped Camilla. Her fatigue seemed to have been swept away. However, she knew it was just an illusion. It was Joan who felt comfortable, not herself. She shared Joan's happiness. How is it? Thunder asked. Everything is going well. The depth is about 50 meters, Camilla replied. The stone pillars don't seem to be getting thicker, and even the islands and reefs. I don't see anything like the seabed or underwater mountains. They're all separated. This was her task. Although Joan could move freely under the water, she could not accurately describe what she saw. If she wanted to know what Joan saw, she had to use the ability of mind resonance. The depth is over 100 meters. The light is obviously dimmer, but the scene is still very clear. The stone pillars and the islands are still there, and there's no sign of an end, Camilla muttered in a low voice. Damn it, they're too long. Maybe the reefs that look like islands aren't real islands, but what? Someone asked. Chapter 1139. The swirling sea is so vast, so it's understandable that there are all kinds of strange terrains. After a moment of silence, Thunder said, I once saw a weathered rocky mountain in the kingdom of Wolfheart. It's somewhat similar to these stone pillars, except that it's not as long and slender. But there's no wind underwater. Camilla thought but did not say it out loud. Wind? Joan's voice suddenly came to her mind. It's windy here. What did you say? Camilla asked subconsciously. Well, did I not make myself clear enough? Thunder coughed twice. Then I'll say it again. When I was in the kingdom of Wolfheart, I'm not asking you, I'm asking Joan. Camilla interrupted. Although it was a little rude, she was too shocked to care about it. Joan just said, there's wind at the bottom of the sea. All the listeners on the deck could not help but be stunned. I can't feel it, but I can hear the sound of the wind. Whoosh, 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 don't you hear it? Yes, it was a telepathic communication. If Joan could hear it, he should be able to hear it as well. Camilla hurriedly concentrated. Sure enough, there was a faint sound of wind coming from the bottomless sea under Joan's feet, as if air currents were passing through a cave. I'll go down a little more, said Joan, but in a different position. After saying that, she untied the laces on her skirt and let her legs come into close contact with the seawater. Green scales quickly emerged from her ankles and wrapped around her legs, a fish-shaped tail. In an instant, Camilla felt as if the resistance and sluggishness in front of her had disappeared. With just a wave of her tail, her body had darted far away in the water. She was even more agile than a fish. This was Cheong's real appearance. His diving speed instantly increased. 200 meters. The sound of the wind seems to be getting louder. There's still no change in the water. 400 meters, it's completely dark. Fortunately, Joan doesn't rely on light to see. The stone pillars are still extending downwards, and new pillars are appearing. The rope used to fix the depth has reached its end. Can you connect a few more sections? Damn it, how deep is it now? 600 or 800? Joan couldn't be sure either. If it's the stone pillar, at this point, Camilla, who had been narrating the situation, suddenly froze. No, how is this possible? What happened? Thunder quickly asked. The chief butler of Sleeping Island felt an indescribable chill rise from his back and spread to his whole body. The pillar is gone. Gone? Do you mean disappeared? Thunder frowned and looked at the sea. The dense islands and reefs around them had not changed at all. No matter how he looked at them, they did not seem to have disappeared. Camilla held her trembling hands and said, There is no seabed. There is nothing. They are floating in the sea. Everyone couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. In Joan's vision, she clearly saw that the pillars had reached their ends. However, it did not mean that they had a fulcrum. Instead, they stopped abruptly as if their ends had been cut off, leaving only their upper halves floating in the water. Not only the small stone pillars, but even the islands and reefs were the same. The huge stone blocks stood in the air without any support. This scene was too strange, and it completely defied common sense. Floating? Do you mean the islands are all floating in the water? 3 gods above, they're all rocks. Woman, are you sure? Impossible. Even if they can float, they can't be as still as they are now. Without the anchors, the current is enough to push the entire shadow islands into the fjords. The deck suddenly burst into an uproar. All of you, shut up. Thunder shouted, causing the others to calm down. Are all the islands floating? I don't know. They are of different lengths, Camilla murmured. The new stone pillars are still extending downward. Joan's speed of diving had obviously slowed down. Apparently, although her ability could resist the pressure of the deep sea, there was still a limit. Just then, Camilla noticed a strange scene. A few of the pillars closer to Cheong seemed to have been elongated. It was not their overall length. They were almost as straight as tree trunks, plunging deeper into the sea. She could not see the end of them at all. What caught her attention were the details, such as the lines on the pillars and the barnacles attached to them. Starting from one of the pillars, the former seemed to be more slender, while the latter gradually turned from a circle to an oval. Since there were normal specimens within a few meters of them, it was quite incongruous. Do you want to take a closer look? Joan sensed Camilla's surprise. There is something strange over there. Okay. Camilla cleared her dry throat. Be careful. Joan slowly swam to the nearest stone pillar and reached out her hand to touch the strange barnacles. But the next moment, something creepy happened. The chief butler saw with his own eyes that the finger covered with scales grew a little longer. What's going on? Joan reached out her hand and opened it again in confusion. Is it my illusion? Camilla suddenly had a bad premonition. Just as she was about to inform Thunder to stop the dive, a fish swam under Joan's eyelids. It was an ordinary silver eel about an arm's length. But when it swam past the mermaid, its body grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. In less than 5 meters, it turned from an eel into a creature that looked like a sea snake. But this was not the end. Its sinking speed continued to accelerate, and after a few breaths of time, the silver light eel was suddenly stretched to its limit. Its tail was still in sight, but its head had already plunged into the boundless darkness. It was at least 100 meters long. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared into the deep sea like a stream of light, as if it had been sucked in by something. Camilla felt her scalp tingle and her hair stand on end. She could not help but shout, "Get out of there! The search is over. Come up immediately!" But it was too late. Joan swayed her tail a few times, but her body did not move. Or rather, the speed at which she was stretching was the same as the speed at which she was rising. Camilla could clearly see that her tail had grown to more than 10 meters long, but its width did not change at all. It was a horrifying scene. Joan began to panic. What's wrong with me? Camilla, what should I do? Don't stop, swim harder. You can do it, Camilla hissed. But all her efforts were in vain. No matter how hard Joan swam, her body kept sinking as if she had sunk into a swamp. At this moment, not only her tail, but even her body and hands were distorted. She seemed to realize something and helplessly stretched out her arms above her head. Somebody help me? No. Before she could finish her words, her vision suddenly sank and then turned pitch black. Camilla opened her eyes and knelt on the ground helplessly. Sweat dripped from the tip of her nose and dripped on the back of her hand. Only then did she realize that she was covered in cold sweat. What's going on? Is Joan in danger? Thunder came up to her and helped her up. Chapter 1140. It seemed like a long time had passed, but it also seemed like a short moment. Joan saw her body stretching infinitely toward the dark bottom of the sea until a white light spot appeared at the end of her vision. Then, the light spot turned into a dazzling light that enveloped her. The next moment, the feeling of a body that did not belong to her came back to her consciousness. The roaring sound of the water almost broke her ears. The tranquility of the deep sea was instantly shattered. She felt as if she had been sucked into a whirlpool, but she quickly rejected this idea. A whirlpool would only revolve around the center, but here, there was a rapid flow of water in all directions. It was the collision of these water currents that caused such a loud sound. Even Joan could not keep her balance in such a situation. Everything was out of control. She was like a feather floating in the stormy waves. She could only let the water flow around her, crashing left and right. Where am I? Although she could not figure it out, she knew that she was not in the depths of the sea. Her scales did not feel too much pressure, and the water was no more than 100 meters deep, which meant that she would soon surface. Besides, no matter how hard Joan called out to Camilla in her mind, she could not get any response. This made her desperate to get out of the current predicament. Even if she could not control herself, she had to at least float to the surface and have a look. Fortunately, it was much easier to float than to change direction. She tried her best to raise her head and slowly rose up in the surging currents. The moment she jumped out of the water, Joan opened her eyes wide in confusion. The shadow islands had disappeared without a trace. There were rocks all around her and above her head. The vast sea had turned into a waterway, hundreds of meters long. The seawater flowed rapidly in it, rumbling. The wind was blowing above the water, so strong that it was almost impossible to open one's eyes. The whistling sound overlapped with the sound of the wind at the bottom of the sea. Just as she turned her head around, she saw a bright light behind her. The water rushed toward the source of the light, as if it had found a vent. Was she going to have to go through the same thing again? Before she could think further, Joan was pushed into the light by the unstoppable seawater. The roaring suddenly quieted down, as if she was a lot farther away from the light. For a moment, she felt that she was flying. Her body became light as a feather and did not feel real at all. But soon she realized that she was indeed in the sky. Beneath her feet was the familiar blue ocean, but it was 1,000 meters away. The surrounding rocks were replaced by the sky. The light she saw came from the sun hanging high above the clouds, and the seawater that carried her out of the cave had become a wide waterfall. But she was neither Maggie nor lightning. She couldn't fly. Just as this thought appeared in his mind, his body suddenly fell. Plop! After a frightening fall from the sky, Joan fell headfirst into the sea. If he hadn't seen a similar scene in the magic movie, he would have been scared to death. She swam out of the water again and let out a long breath. That's right, I was clearly in the deep sea just now. How did I suddenly get washed up into the sky? At this thought, Joan looked up and froze on the spot. God, what is that? She could hardly believe her eyes. An incomparably huge boulder floated in midair. It was so huge that it was impossible to see its entire appearance. The shadow cast by the boulder covered half of the sea like a dark cloud in the sky. Some of the clouds were even below the boulder, which gave people the illusion that it was not an isolated giant, but the top of a mountain. However, even the impassable mountain range was not majestic in front of the boulder. Joan estimated that the boulder was at least 100 meters thick, which was like a large island. There were many cracks on the thick boulder, ranging from hundreds of meters to a few kilometers. Seawater poured out of the cracks, forming a waterfall that connected the sky and the sea. Such a large amount of water poured into the boulder, stirring up huge waves on the surface of the sea. Even Lord Thunder had never seen such a shocking spectacle, right? Although Joan did not know where she was sure that she was far away from the fjords and Grey Castle. Otherwise, such a huge boulder would have been discovered a long time ago. Can I go back? In the turbulent waves, Joan put half of her head into the water and spat out a string of bubbles. Plop! Just then, she heard the sound of something falling into the water not far away. It sounded like something had fallen from above. Are there other people who were unfortunately involved? Joan estimated the distance, dived into the water, and swam in that direction. After swimming for about a quarter of an hour, she finally got a good look at the thing that had fallen into the water. It was an oddly shaped boat, about the size of a 3-masted ship. The lower half seemed to be a cross between a fish and a squid, and the upper half was a frame of curved ribs, wrapped in flesh that looked like internal organs. At first glance, it looked like the body of an animal that had been half-eaten, and she could not help but feel a little nauseous. However, it was definitely not an inanimate object. Soon after falling into the water, it spread its 4 pelvic fins and began to paddle in the direction of the spreading waves. Joan followed the direction of the boat and was shocked. In the distance, there were hundreds of such monsters. They lined up neatly in several rows, half hidden in the waves. They looked like a huge fleet. After the newly fallen one joined the fleet slowly sailed to the east. Joan only breathed a sigh of relief when they completely disappeared from the horizon. What should I do next? Since the monster boat had fallen from the floating land above, there might be other strange enemies nearby. Although Joan had never seen such a monster, her intuition told her not to approach it. Ever since she had awakened as a witch, her intuition had never been wrong. Don't force yourself. Your friends are still waiting for you to go back. Lady Camilla's words flashed in Joan's mind. Then the voices and smiles of Lightning, Maggie, and Sister Lorger appeared in her mind one by one. She wanted to go back. She had never had such a strong desire in her life. She wanted to go back to Neverwinter, the place where she had made so many friends during the winter. She wanted to go back to her friends. Ah! Joan shouted as if to encourage herself. She identified the direction and swam to the west. No matter how wide the sea was, there was always a boundary. Moreover, Lightning had said that the world they lived in was spherical. As long as she kept swimming in one direction, she would definitely see her friends in the exploration group again. Definitely. The fleet has to go. Thunder looked at Camilla Derry, who was leaning against the fence. The Shadow Islands isn't the end of our journey. We'll consume a lot of water every day we stay here. It's already the third day. If we go on like this, we'll lose control of the fleet. But Camilla looked haggard. Joan hasn't come back yet. It's not your fault. Thunder patted her on the shoulder. Besides, it won't get any better if we keep waiting. Do you remember what you said? There are only two possibilities for the spiritual connection to be cut off. One is that the other party is dead, and the other is too far away. If you don't want to believe the first possibility, then you shouldn't stay here. You mean, go to the east of the ceiling to find her? To be honest, the possibility is slim, but it's better than waiting here. Thunder said patiently, don't forget that Joan isn't an ordinary person. An ordinary sailor will die after falling into the water, but Joan won't. She's lived in the sea for more than 10 years. She can survive without us. I see. Camilla bit her lip. Then I'll go to the ceiling with you. No, Thunder interrupted her. You're not in the right state of mind for the next exploration. And I promised His Majesty that no matter what the result is, I'll let you return to Neverwinter immediately after exploring the Shadow Islands. We still need your ability to fight against the demons. Besides, His Majesty is the only one who knows what happened to Cheong in the sea. Your information is crucial. He paused and looked at her solemnly. We all have our own responsibilities. It's the mature thing to do. Camilla closed her eyes sadly. 2 hours later, the snow wind sounded its whistle. The fleet, which had been waiting for a long time, set sail and sailed to the eastern sea. One of the ships broke away from the fleet, turned around, and headed back in the opposite direction. Chapter 1141. At the front of Tower Station Number 9 on the Fertile Plains. The target is 6 degrees 4 minutes northeast from here, 6,500 meters away. This area, requesting for artillery coverage. Lying on Maggie's back, Sylvie looked down at the ground not far away. The turf on the ground had been turned over and the soil was still fresh. It seemed that the turf had been turned over in the last 2 or 3 days. Yes, Shavi replied briefly through the sigil of listening. We'll start the bombardment in 5 minutes. Then she added, please be careful. Sylvie could not help looking in the direction of Tequila. At this height, she could already see the ruins of the holy city with her naked eyes. Although it was still more than 50 kilometers away and looked smaller than a fingernail, it gave her a feeling that it was close at hand. The outline of the collapsed city blended with the woods like a forgotten miniature sculpture. Although it was beyond the observation range of the Eye of Magic, she could still feel a shining red star flashing. As long as it did not move, they were still temporarily safe. Yes, I know. She put away the sigil and patted Maggie's broad back. Let's fly higher. Maggie, who had transformed into a devil beast, let out a long howl and spread her giant wings that were nearly 10 meters long. She was now almost the size of 2 ordinary devil beasts, which made her a giant among the devil beasts. She was even comparable to the mutant devil beast ridden by Caberdabi. But when she thought that Maggie was still a giant among pigeons, Sylvie felt relieved. After climbing for about 100 meters, she faintly heard the dull sound of thunder behind her. Then, several dust columns rose from the ground in front of her. She could clearly see the ripples around the columns. Wherever the dust column passed, grass was sent flying, as if the solid ground had turned into clear water. No matter how many times she watched this scene, it was always pleasing to the eye. Then came the second and third round of thunder. The artillery battalion was able to accurately shoot shells into the area she had marked. Since it was difficult to determine the specific area of the attack from the air, they usually used a rough estimate instead. This area was about the size of the castle district of Neverwinter, which was about 16,400 square meters. It was also one of the areas she was most familiar with. Under the cover of the artillery fire, it did not take long for Sylvie to see severed limbs flying in the dust column. A 152mm grenade was enough to create a 1-meter-deep crater, but the demons could not hide deeper than 50 centimeters, and that was on the ground that had been corroded by the red mist. If it was an ordinary ground, it would at most cover his head. If a shell happened to land on his head, not even a complete corpse would be left. Of course, it wasn't necessary for a grenade to hit accurately to kill a demon. The shockwaves released by the grenade were the real killer, especially for targets buried underground. His body was tightly attached to the soil, which meant that there was no buffer. Any impact within 20 meters of the center of the explosion would be fatal. His Majesty called this method of attacking, which did not care about the specific position of the enemy, but bombarded the entire area. After 5 rounds of artillery fire, hundreds of demons crawled out of the soil and began to flee. The enemy has appeared. It's a mad demon. Please continue firing at the same angle, Sylvie reported. Roger. All of a sudden, she seemed to have sensed something and raised her head to look at Tequila. The red starlight suddenly became much brighter, and it quickly flew towards the camp. She immediately took out another sigil of listening and said, "Lightning, come back. The Magic Slayer is on the move." Maggie also turned around and quickly retreated from the airspace. 7 minutes later, the 3 of them returned to the air defense circle of the First Army. The Magic Slayer was also within the range of the magic eye. Sylvie saw the blue-skinned demon, which resembled a human, hovering above the bombardment area twice. It then stared coldly at the 3 of them in the air with a murderous look on its face. During this time, the artillery battalion did not stop firing. Sylvie realized that the Magic Slayer could not do anything even though he was angry. Even the powerful Magic Slayer could not stop the whistling shells from killing his own kind. In the end, the Magic Slayer could only abandon the fleeing mad demons and turn around to return. Sylvie immediately felt a lot less pressured. "It's gone. Shall we go and scout again?" Maggie shouted. She glanced at Lightning, who was clenching her fists tightly, and finally shook her head. "Let's call it a day. I need to conserve some magic power for tonight. Besides, we've already swept the area within 5 to 6 kilometers. It's enough to ensure the safety of the engineering team for the next few days." After returning to the underground command center of Station Number 9, Sylvie painted a piece of land on the map green. It was the area that they had swept today. Almost all the areas along the railway were green. "Thank you." The light of dawn came up to her with a cup of black tea. It seems that Lady Edith's banishment plan worked. Sylvie took the tea and said with a smile, "Yes, it seems so for now." This was not the first time she had encountered such an encounter. In fact, ever since they were within 100 kilometers of Tequila, the risk of scouting ahead had increased significantly. Using the magic eye to observe through the soil made it difficult for her to keep track of the enemy in the air. Within this distance, the demons could already stay in the air for a long time with a lot of gas tanks. Therefore, the General Staff formulated a banishment plan, dividing the reconnaissance area into several layers. The area within 0 to 2 kilometers was the absolute safety zone. Every corner of this area had been scanned by the magic eye, and the station would be on alert at all times. It was unlikely that they would be ambushed. Within this distance, the air defense team could leave the trenches and provide a wider protection circle. The area within 2 to 10 kilometers was the screening area, which was within the attack range of the Longsong cannons. It was also the main airspace for Sylvie and Maggie. After a clean sweep, the area would be considered relatively safe and marked in green on the map. The area within 10 to 50 kilometers was the danger zone. Lightning was the only one there to scout. Her purpose was to find the enemies hiding in the clouds and warn them in advance. This was equivalent to buying time for Maggie and Sylvie to retreat. Only Lightning was capable of getting rid of the enemy at this distance. Even the Magic Slayer could not catch up with a witch who could reach the speed of sound. The banishment plan had proved to be effective. The reconnaissance team could decide when to attack, and the enemy could only passively intercept them. Without the cooperation of the ground troops, the devil beasts alone could hardly cause any damage to the armored train at the front line. The core concept of the plan was to gradually turn the screening area into a safe zone, remove the demon spies, and banish the most threatening Magic Slayer from the battlefield. This way, the Magic Slayer would not be able to catch the reconnaissance team despite his strength. It would be even better if they could make the Magic Slayer lose his mind and force him to charge at the front line. The only pity was that the Magic Slayer had not shown any signs of losing control. "By the way," Sylvie said as she looked around, "where's Miss Pearl of the Northern Region?" She received His Majesty's order and boarded the Seagull with Iron Axe to return to Neverwinter, Philin replied with a smile. "I think it's about time." Chapter 1142. In Grey Castle, City of Neverwinter. Roland received the Commander-in-Chief of the First Army, Iron Axe, and the Minister of the General Staff, Edith Kant. How did it go? How did it feel to ride the Seagull for the first time? Roland looked at his two subordinates with great interest. Your Majesty, although it flies very fast for me, it's a little too exciting," Iron Axe said with a rare look of fear on his face. Iron Axe showed a rare look of palpitation on his face. "I didn't feel it when I was watching from the side, but when I sat in it myself, I found that it was a little shaky. Especially when I was going up and down, I always felt that there was nothing under my buttocks. I didn't have any confidence." He then straightened his back and saluted Roland, gritted his teeth, and said loudly, "Of course, I'll try my best to overcome this. Please rest assured, Your Majesty." "So, this experienced Majin warrior has a slight fear of heights?" Roland could not help raising his eyebrows. "How are you going to overcome it? When the war comes to an end, I'll watch the magic movie whenever I have time until I get used to it. That's really the style of the Sand Nation." Roland twitched the corner of his mouth and turned to Edith. "What about you?" The Pearl of the Northern Region licked her lips and said after a while, "Great." "And that's it?" Roland waited for a long time but did not hear anything else. He looked at Edith in confusion, only to find that her cheeks were slightly flushed and her eyes were shining with an indescribable emotion. "Well," Roland sighed, "my subordinates are a little different from ordinary people in some ways." He had expected to see their shocked or emotional expressions, and then they would praise him for his extraordinary creation, but it seemed that he had overthought it. "Now that you're back, let's go to the meeting room." Roland stood up. "It's time to make the final preparations for the war." After nearly 6 months of construction and advancement, the first main railway on the fertile plains was less than 60 kilometers away from the Tequila ruins. When the construction of Tower Station No. 10 was completed, the First Army would be able to launch a direct attack on the enemies there. The manpower and resources invested in Project Torch far exceeded that of any military operation in the past 4 years. More than 80% of the steel produced in the furnace area was turned into rails. There was only one strategic goal, and that was to eliminate the possibility of the demons erecting the obelisk before the arrival of the bloody moon. Once the fertile plains were covered by the red mist, It meant that the demons could cross the impassable mountain range and invade the interior at any time. Not only would the battle line be greatly extended, but the First Army would also have to face enemies who were no longer limited by distance. For humans who were outnumbered, this was definitely not an ideal start. On the contrary, if they could conquer Tequila first, the demons could only choose the gods' stone mines in the other two holy cities to grow their obelisks. Starfall City and Arietta were closer to the north of the plains. Even if they built strongholds there, they would not be able to directly threaten the Four Kingdoms. In this way, not only would the Battle of Divine will be within their grasp, but they would also be able to buy at least another 400 years for the human race. As for Grey Castle, which had entered the Industrial Age, how much could it develop in 400 years? The answer was self-evident as to how many times human beings, who were not limited by the food shortage, could develop in 400 years. Therefore, the vast and fertile plains served as a strategic buffer and reserve land for future development. Mortals would eventually defeat the demons. However, this did not mean that their generation would be able to witness the arrival of that day. This was also the deeper reason why Roland did not tell the others. Unfortunately, the reality was not always as perfect as the plan. According to the original plan, as long as the demons in Tequila were eradicated and the ruins were rebuilt into a stronghold, it would be considered a great success. If this was the goal, the First Army was now only one step away from complete victory. However, the appearance of the Magic Slayer forced a change in the plan. The power of the curse rendered all healing methods ineffective, so small wounds could be fatal. Lightning's self-healing ability was basically equivalent to the speed of infection, but Leaf was not so lucky. According to Ash's secret observation and report, Leaf's condition was deteriorating. Although she did not say anything, her complexion and spirit could not be hidden from Ash's, who was always by her side. Deteriorating meant that the speed at which the wounds were decaying had exceeded the limit of healing. Like a lesion that was spreading little by little, it seemed to be fine at first, but in the end, the body would collapse. Whether it would take a year or a decade, as the most important part of the population expansion, this was an unacceptable loss. They had to put an end to the Magic Slayer in Tequila. In the conference room, the witches and the representatives of the army gathered together. The light screen from the third border city was displayed on the wall. They were discussing how to ensure the death of the senior demon with the power of the curse in the final battle. First of all, according to the General Staff's deduction, when the situation becomes unsalvageable, the Magic Slayer has a 90% chance of retreating, said Edith. Edith was still the first one to speak. There's not much concrete evidence for this conclusion. It's more of an expectation than anything else. Judging from the fact that it's still keeping a considerable distance from us, it should be the opposite of Caberdabi. I agree with this conclusion, said Aletheia, who had dealt with the demons the most. Being fearless doesn't mean that they will die for no reason. In this respect, they're just like us. A senior demon is much more useful than an ordinary mad demon, so it's unlikely that he will die with his subordinates. So we have to take the initiative and intercept the Magic Slayer on his way out. Edith nodded. Fortunately, we know the Magic Slayer's whereabouts very well, and we've experienced this before. She looked at Andrea Quinn and said, if the Magic Slayer doesn't notice it, sniping him from a long distance is undoubtedly the safest and most reliable choice. Andrea ran her fingers through her hair gracefully. I have a question, Tilly said. Go ahead, Your Highness, the Pearl of the Northern Region said with a hand on her chest. First, we don't know whether we can kill the Magic Slayer with a single bullet. What if we can only injure him? We don't have a second chance. Second, what if the Magic Slayer has already noticed the long-range weapon and is trying to avoid it when he retreats? Based on our previous battles, this is not a small possibility. After all, the Magic Slayer's understanding of firearms has far exceeded our expectations. We've also considered these two questions, Edith replied. As for the first question, the General Staff has come to the conclusion that we should use God's stones of retaliation as bullets. A God's stone bullet? Yes, even if it's not fatal, the Magic Slayer will still lose his ability to fly. Of course, I know that the smaller the god's stone, the harder it will be. A god's stone that can be cut to the size of an ordinary bullet can be directly smashed by a hammer, so it won't be able to withstand the pressure when it is shot out of the chamber. However, Miss Andrea's weapon is of a different caliber, so perhaps we can give it a try. She paused for a moment and then said, "Also, I've confirmed with Miss Agatha that the god's stone melted with magic blood will be much stronger. She came back with 2 bottles of fresh blood collected from demons, and she should be doing some experiments now. Using demons' blood to make a weapon that can kill them? I like that idea." Aletheia smiled. "Yes, you're the second mortal that I find interesting." The Pearl of the Northern Region replied with a nonchalant smile. "As for the second question, we need a backup troop to fill in the gap. At present, only lightning is faster than the Magic Slayer," Vendi said worriedly. "But she can't stop the Magic Slayer." She shook her head. "There's something faster than the Magic Slayer." "Something?" Tilly seemed to realize something. Chapter 1143. And the people on the plain are God's punishment witches? Exactly. The anti-magic field works just as well as the God's stone. A dozen God's punishment witches should be able to hold off or even kill the enemy. Even if they can't, the sniper team can rush over and give them the final blow, the Pearl of the Northern Region said bluntly. Of course, it won't be easy. How we do it depends on the enemy's actions, but at least we're not completely helpless. I personally think the success rate is not low. After all, the enemy has seen bullets, but has never seen this seagull. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed that an ordinary person could fly into the sky. Roland immediately understood the General Staff's plan. Indeed, it was not safe to rely solely on the sniper team. If the enemy discovered that the patrolling devil beasts had a long-range, accurate weapon, they would definitely make some countermeasures when they retreated. For example, they would keep flying in a different direction or lower their altitude to escape. Even Andrea would not be able to do anything about it. She could find the coin that was bound to stand, but the coin that was bound to stand did not necessarily exist. In this case, someone had to step forward to fill in the gap. In addition to being faster than the Magic Slayer, the pursuer had to be as strong as the Magic Slayer. Theoretically, there was no such person among the witches. However, the General Staff had thought of using a glider and a group of God's punishment witches to achieve the same effect. It was a clever way to save the country. The seagull could hide in the sky and turn altitude into speed when needed. After a period of accumulation of kinetic energy, the seagull could easily exceed 500 kilometers per hour and catch up with the fleeing demon. However, this plan is probably the best we can do at the moment, but I don't think Ashes will agree. After all, it's more dangerous than the front line, and we might even encounter the Magic Slayer. Roland looked at Tilly. "So, I'll convince her," Tilly said after a moment of silence. "I'm going." "Your Highness," Vendi said anxiously. At this moment, Roland could vaguely guess the mood of the person in charge of the Witch Union. If anything happened to him, only Anna and Tilly could maintain their status as witches. One was the legitimate queen, and the other was the legal heir of the bloodline. As long as the two of them were there, they could firmly stabilize the various forces, so Vendi certainly did not want to see any accidents. If you think about it, what we're doing is no different from transporting witches. By the time the Magic Slayer realizes the existence of Seagull, the Sisters of Tequila will have forced him into a corner. Hence, the risks are manageable. Tilly smiled. "Don't worry. I'm not an idiot like Ashes. I won't do anything beyond my capabilities." Roland knew that the other party had made up his mind, so he didn't want to waste any more time on this. He looked at Edith and said, "Go on." "Yes, Your Majesty." Edith walked to the side of the map. "The last step of the plan is the location of the ambush. Without the support of the red mist, the senior demons won't be able to hold on for long. Therefore, this subconscious thought will drive them to retreat along the bloodline so that they can replenish their gas tanks as soon as possible. This also means that the best ambush spot will be somewhere near the red line. I have a good suggestion about this," Aletheia suddenly said. I don't know if you still remember that the extraordinaire once sneaked into the enemy's rear. That idiot. Tilly put her hand on her forehead. I blamed her for wasting a 5-colored stone. But now, this location behind the Tequila ruins will give us an excellent observation point. Aletheia raised her main tentacle. As long as we use the phantom instrument, we'll have a panoramic view of the surroundings of the bloodline. Roland suddenly remembered that when Lorgar the wolf girl discovered the army of demons near the ruins, the Witch Union had planned an investigation. However, the plan had failed because the team had gone astray. If the 5-colored stone had been crushed right in front of the Tequila ruins, they would have been able to know the demons' movements in advance, and the night battle at Tower Number 1 would not have happened. Roland had thought that he was just unlucky, but now he was lucky. It was really a pity. He could not help but think of a sentence. Fate is too wonderful for words. In this case, Iron Axe and Edith will stay in the 3rd border city for the next few days and figure out the ambush plan as soon as possible, Roland ordered. As for the magic bullets, Agatha and the Ministry of Engineering will work together to solve the problem. Yes, Your Majesty, the others said in unison. When the meeting was over, Aletheia's voice suddenly came to Roland's ears. Judging from the others' reactions, it was a secret message that only he could hear. Celine hopes that you can come to the underground. There's a new breakthrough in the research of the magic ceremony cube. Half an hour later, Roland walked into the underground laboratory. Celine pressed a button on the magic cube, and a familiar red line suddenly appeared in front of him. So, what do you mean by a new breakthrough? Look at these. Celine stretched out her auxiliary tentacles and handed him 2 thumb-sized stones. They're all parts of the magic cube. They should have a long history. They do look a little old, Roland said while touching his chin. There were obvious signs of wear and tear on the side near the surface. You can dismantle the magic cube without damaging it? Wait, since the parts of the magic cube are in your hands, why is it still glowing? Is it? That's right, Your Majesty. Celine smiled and said, the parts in the magic cube are the new parts that I've replicated. The fact that it can function normally means that those parts are working. I wonder if you're satisfied with this breakthrough? That's amazing. Roland held her tentacles in surprise as if he was admiring a precise knife. It's only been 3 months. I thought it would take me a year or even longer. The sleeping spell's thin wrist has helped me a lot, and the structure of the magic cube is much simpler than the magic core. Celine let him look at her for a while and then withdrew her auxiliary tentacles, feeling a little embarrassed. I think I need several thousand pieces for the experiment. I think I can make a replica with 500 pieces of similar materials. The garrison at the festive harbor should be acting according to my order. I think we'll hear from them soon, Roland said excitedly. If he could successfully replicate the magic cube, it might bring another round of earth-shaking changes to Neverwinter like the steam engine. If that's the case, can I ask for a reward? Celine suddenly changed the topic and said with a hint of expectation, of course, all this is for the advancement of the research in the future. What do you want? Roland asked curiously. Chapter 1144. At night, Roland told Anna about the meeting during the day. Considering the strength and stability of the god's punishment bullets, this special weapon may need to be further adjusted. Only you can find a balance between power and practical application. It's a higher priority than other projects for now. During this period, I'll ask Andrea and Agatha to cooperate with you. I always feel like I'll never be able to finish my work. Anna leaned her head on his shoulder. Machine tools that can process airplane parts, improvements on internal combustion engines, railroad tracks at the front line, and many projects recorded in books. I'm a little envious of Pasha and Celine. Although Blackfire can be used as a hand, it's not as flexible as tentacles, and the number of tentacles you can control is very limited. That won't do. I don't want to sleep with a big tumor in my arms. Besides, you're not only the Minister of Engineering, but also the Queen of Grey Castle. You have to show up in front of the public often, said Roland with a smile. He knew that Anna was not complaining, but sharing her happiness with him. Ever since she took the position of Minister of Engineering, she had become much more cheerful. She was no longer expressionless in front of others. The only thing that had not changed was her initial seriousness. Of course, I'm also looking for suitable people for you. If everything goes well, the Minister of Engineering may be filled up very soon. Based on the time, Rex from the Society of Wondrous Crafts should have already arrived at the fjords. He just did not know if the summary of buoyancy, as a reward, would attract their attention. The pie he drew at the end was based on 20,000 leagues under the sea. For a would-be inventor who had never been exposed to the concept of science fiction, such a grand and magnificent idea could be regarded as the best resonator. Really? Anna stretched and hugged him gently. I'll be looking forward to it. But now, I want some other rewards. Well, it seems that there's more than one person to be rewarded today. Roland smiled in his heart and gently stroked her smooth back. After Anna fell asleep in satisfaction, Roland also closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, the ceiling had changed into the shape of the Tower of Souls, and the morning sun was entering the room through the curtains. He washed up, ate breakfast, and sent Zero out. Everything was the same as usual. Roland leaned on the railing of the corridor and looked down at the crowded streets and alleys. Students with backpacks, office workers with hurried footsteps, and old people exercising in the morning formed a busy scene of life. It was chaotic but full of vitality. The city still looked peaceful, no different from when he first came here, but he knew that the world had changed. In a place that ordinary people could not see, there was a force that was changing it, as if the dream world had its own consciousness. The never-before-seen memories, the old red-covered book, and the note inside the book were all proof of the changes. Ever since he had read the book Raison d'être, Roland had been very interested in the name of the Rose Café. However, no matter how he searched the internet or how the witches searched the streets, he could not find any clues. There were a total of 46 cafes in the city, but none of them was called Rose Café. He had considered the possibility that it was a prank, but as he learned more about the real world, he found that the content in the book became more and more difficult to ignore. Even the notes seemed to have a deeper meaning. The aliens that had completely disappeared. The war that had not broken out for the first time. The unstoppable awakening and erosion. All of this seemed to be similar to the real world, especially the discovery of the battle between the Radiation Clan and the Matchstick Man, which made the content in the book even more familiar. What puzzled him the most was why a book created in the dream world could vaguely correspond to the real world and also use the words, Battle of Divine Will. Unfortunately, according to Garcia, the author of the book did not leave any information behind, so the only clue was the note. However, before he found the Rose Café, he could only bury his doubts in his heart. He returned to the living room and waited until it was about 8 o'clock when he heard a rhythmic knock on the door. Bang, bang, bang. This was the signal to indicate that there was no one in the corridor. Roland hurriedly opened the door and let the person who knocked on the door in. Your Majesty, good morning. 3 petite witches raised their elbows and saluted him. One of them was Donnan, the lightless curtain, who was the first to enter the dream world. They are really high school students. Roland could not help thinking. He knew Donnan very well. She had joined the Blessed Army the 2nd year after her awakening and was already 28 years old when her soul was transformed. She had rich combat experience and was good at using short knives, daggers, and other weapons to sneak into battle. However, because of her small size and the special magic power that could slow down the aging process, she looked no different from a young girl in her teens. The other 2 witches also looked the same. He could not help but think of the conversation he had with Celine. Go to school? I remember that the average age of a god's punishment which is above 20, right? According to this age group, the corresponding college is a university, but their level of knowledge is only around that of a junior high school student. If their age does not match, I'm afraid that their identity may be exposed. Don't worry about that. If you only want to look young, many of us can satisfy that requirement. Judging from the fact that the other 2 witches were younger than Donnan, Roland knew that Celine was not exaggerating. He could only say that he did not pay much attention to the gods' punishment witches after handing over the daily chores to Phyllis, Faldy, and the others. After all, the team of more than 300 witches was divided into dozens of rotating groups. If he was the leader every time, he would not have the time to collect and memorize all kinds of academic materials. In this regard, Roland believed that he was quite self-disciplined. My name is Saint Miron, and my ability is to imitate gestures. As long as I can connect with someone, I can perfectly imitate any movement. This is my second time in the dream world. Please give me some advice. My name is Dodo, and my ability is to put non-existent pockets. Simply put, I can put things in invisible bags made by magic. It's not very useful, but I will live up to Lady Celine's trust and the reputation of the Quest Society. The two witches introduced themselves respectively. Judging from their abilities, they were not combat witches. Since such witches could not join the Blessed Army, they usually worked harder in other areas. Roland seemed to be able to prove that the three witches who were playing cards could affect their temperament. As for Donnan, she was probably chosen by Celine to protect them. After all, the dream world was not without danger, especially now that there were more and more fallen evils. Roland nodded and looked at the three witches. Celine should have told you about this mission. Try not to talk too much later. Just cooperate with me when the other party asks. Yes, Your Majesty. After solving the problem of age, the next problem was how to go to school for unregistered people. In fact, the identity of the tequila witches had been bothering Roland for a long time. Every time he went to rob fallen evils, he had to do it secretly and in the middle of the night. If it weren't for the witch's ability, the warehouse, which always had different people going in and out, would have been exposed to the enthusiastic residents of the Tongzi district. No matter how he thought about it, there was only one person who could solve this problem once and for all. Chapter 1145. Hey, good timing. I have something to talk to you about. Garcia's voice came from the other end of the line before Roland could say anything. What's up? It's not convenient to talk over the phone. Just come to my room. You just woke up, right? Roland could feel the disdain coming from the other side of the phone, as if staying in bed was a heinous crime for a martialist. Well, he thought for a while and decided to go to room 0827 first. If Garcia was in a bad mood, he could talk to her another day. After hanging up the phone, Roland asked the three witches to wait in the living room for a while and then went to room 0827 alone. The door's open. Come in. Garcia had obviously heard his footsteps. Roland pushed the door open and walked into the living room. She was wearing a loose summer dress and holding two glasses in front of the refrigerator. Her wet gray hair fell on her shoulders and tiny beads of sweat hung on the tip of her nose. She was wearing a pair of cartoon flip-flops. At this moment, she did not look like a serious and self-disciplined martialist at all, but more like an ordinary college student enjoying her summer vacation. What do you want to drink? Water, tea, Coke. I have iced water. Right? Roland thought. Garcia's actual age is not that different from mine, at most 2 or 3 years. If he had not been set up by the dream world as a down-and-out landlord of a tube-shaped apartment who dropped out of school and lost his job after working in a bar, he would still be in school. Coke, Roland replied casually. Did you just finish your morning exercise? Do you think everyone is as lazy as you? Roland was slightly stunned. She was obviously so unguarded, but she still spoke as if she had just met him. It was a miracle that she could live until now. But after knowing her for so long, Roland was sure that she was not in a bad mood at the moment. In fact, she was even in a good mood. Did it have something to do with what she wanted to say? Here, iced green tea. Garcia put the drink in front of him. I think I just said Coke. Roland raised his eyebrows. You don't exercise in the morning, so drink less sugary drinks. The evolution of the force of nature has nothing to do with the size of the body. Even a person who looks thin and weak can explode with great power. This also meant that it was unable to help you reshape your body. If you wanted to compete on the stage in the future, it was better to be careful. A well-proportioned martial artist is always more popular than a fat one. If that's the case, then don't list this option. Roland rolled his eyes and asked snappily, "So? You didn't call me here just to talk about my figure, right? And I've said it before, whether it's a celebrity martial artist or a martial arts competition, I have no interest in it at all. Eradicating evil and protecting the world is something that only needs to be shouldered. I don't need fame. Just let me be a nameless guardian. If he really became famous, he would be recognized wherever he went. How could he rob other people then? Unbelievable." Garcia suddenly lowered her voice. She stared at Roland and said slowly, "I thought that you would never say such words. Of course, my master once taught me that you should pay attention to what a person says, but what a person does. If I didn't know what you've done, I probably would have taken these words as shameless bragging. But it's true." Roland naturally understood what she was talking about. Since he had tasted the sweetness of robbing fallen evils, he and the tequila witches began to clean up the hidden low-level fallen evils in the city. During the day, Faldi and the others would search and locate the fallen evils, and at night, he and the combat witches would kill the fallen evils. In addition to the mutated force of nature, they often earned a lot of extra income. In order to avoid being noticed, he would only take some cash or unidentifiable belongings. At the same time, he would occasionally hand over some force of nature to the Martialist Association. After all, the association was also monitoring the movements of the fallen evils. If they found that a large number of fallen evils died inexplicably and the force of nature disappeared, it would probably cause a commotion and he would be involved in trouble. Therefore, it was safer to voluntarily give up some of the obviously exposed targets. In addition, he was also the most active in accepting the wanted and erosion orders issued by the association. According to Garcia, he was the newcomer who had fought with the fallen evils the most, even more than many official members. Moreover, according to the intelligence, the fallen evils had already noticed the emergence of a strong enemy and were trying to find out his identity and whereabouts. In other words, he had thrown a stone into the upper echelons of the Prism City and the fallen evils, but he was not well known among the ordinary martialists and the public. If Garcia had not been the guide in this area and Roland needed to contact her every time he wanted to hand over some force of nature, she would not have known what he had done. "Ahem, it's my job." Roland cleared his throat and said, "Isn't this the duty of a martialist?" "Yes," Garcia said with a rare smile. "This is the duty of a martialist." She took out a piece of paper from under the tea table and handed it to him. "Congratulations, you've become an official member of the Martialist Association. This is the new contract that arrived today. It will take effect after you sign your name. If I remember correctly, I could become an official member of the Prism City if I solved one erosion case on my own. I've completed at least 8 to 10 missions. The administrative efficiency of the Prism City is really low." Roland curled his lips and signed his name at the end of the contract. "Because the Martialist Association is an international organization. So I'm the same as you now?" "No." Garcia shook her head and pushed another small booklet towards him. "To be precise, you're more powerful than me." Roland curiously flipped open the little book and could not help but be slightly stunned. "This is a hunting license." She stopped smiling and said word by word, "It's only granted to extraordinary people who are talented in fighting and determined to fight against evil. There are less than 10 martialists in this city who have a hunting license, and the Prism City has issued about 100 licenses. As for its use and precautions, they are all written at the end of the book. Remember, this is not only the trust that the association has in you, but it also represents a greater responsibility. I hope that you can persevere on this path until humanity obtains the final victory." So, this is what she's happy about? Most people would feel disappointed, jealous, or indignant after being surpassed by a newcomer they had recruited. However, none of these negative emotions could be seen in Garcia's eyes. She was happy from the bottom of her heart, as if she was the one who had won this honor. This made Roland a little worried. Garcia's impression of him was at its highest point, but the more she thought about it, the more pressure she felt. He knew that although Garcia looked indifferent, She had a strong sense of justice in her heart. Otherwise, she would not have helped the residents of the apartment resist the Clover Group's demolition. Roland felt a headache when he thought about the possible misunderstandings that might arise. "By the way, why did you call me?" Garcia took a sip of tea and said, "I've told you everything I wanted to tell you. You didn't call me because you knew about this in advance, did you?" "Well, I did have something to tell you," Roland replied reluctantly. "Can you come to my room?" Garcia glanced at him with a puzzled look and said, "No problem, but can't we talk about it here?" "You'll know when you come." "All right." Roland took a deep breath and took her back to room 0825. When he entered the living room, the three witches immediately looked at him with sparkling eyes. At the same time, he felt an indescribable chill on his back. Chapter 1146. She actually called the police instead of notifying the Martialist Association. Was this her last mercy? After all, in a sense, the association was not bound by the law, so it paid special attention to the behavior of martialists, and the internal punishment was often more severe than the law. No. Roland twitched the corner of his mouth. Why is she still thinking about this at this critical moment? I don't know if I should call the police or deal with it internally. I didn't do anything, so I have a clear conscience. Anyway, I have to calm her down first. Call the police? Roland pretended to be surprised. Why? Why are you asking me why? Garcia said exasperatedly. What did I tell you before? Awakened people can easily fall into delusions of transcendence, lose themselves, and fall into depravity because of the power they obtain by chance. That's why martialists need to restrain themselves and guard their hearts. I don't want to interfere with your private life. It's okay to see girls coming out of your house, but they're not adults at all. The expansion of desire is one of the most obvious signs of depravity. Don't you understand? Compared to the time he spent with the three girls, she was actually more angry at him for indulging his desire and embarking on a path of no return. I understand, but the problem is, if I really did what you said, why did I bring you here to witness the scene? Roland sighed. Don't you think it doesn't make sense at all? In fact, whether I did those things or not, it's easy to attract criticism, so the right thing to do is to avoid them being seen by others. But I took the initiative to let you see them. Don't you think there might be something fishy about it? Garcia blinked her eyes and slowly put down the phone in her hand. Roland secretly heaved a sigh of relief and said in the most sincere tone, "This is what I want to explain next. Miss Garcia, I need your help." Half an hour later. So, those girls who came out of your room don't have that kind of relationship with you, but are part-time tutors? Garcia asked with narrowed eyes. That's right, Roland said calmly. They're all college students from nearby. Besides tutoring Zero, they can also teach these three girls. However, this was not a solution. If they taught them for a long time, they would become suspicious of their identities. After all, they were young, and it would be strange if they did not go to school. I had no choice but to replace him with a new candidate before the tutor became suspicious. He had been very careful in dealing with the problem of the gods' punishment witches. The residents of the community had seen at most 3 or 4 witches walking out from 0825. This reason was not convincing, but at least it was reasonable. When you stood me up for the first time, you mentioned on the phone that relatives came to our house. Are you referring to these 3 people? Hey, that was more than half a year ago. Are you still brooding over it? Yes, but they are not my real relatives. They are from the same village. Roland lied with a straight face. Dawnin, St. Miron, Dodo and I live in the same village, on the same street. When I left the village, they were still playing in the mud by the pond. If these words were spoken in the normal world, it would be as strange as excellent red flag bearer Edison or national tractor model Faraday. Fortunately, the dream world had integrated his and Zero's memories, so it did not sound strange at all. Then why didn't they register? Roland paused for a moment. Because of their gender. I see. Garcia was silent for a long time. When she spoke again, her eyes were much softer. Are there many people like them? Yes, but it's only changed in the last 10 years. Seeing that the conversation was going better than he had expected, Roland seized the opportunity to say, "The news that I joined the Martialist Association has spread in the village. They probably don't want to stay in that small place for the rest of their lives, so they came here to seek refuge with me. Your brother Roland is telling the truth. Please let us stay here. I want to go to school." The three of them made up the last part in time. Garcia slightly turned her head away, seeming to be hesitating. Neither private tutors nor self-study can solve the fundamental problem. I hope they can live a normal life like ordinary people. Among all the people I know, you're the only one who can do this, Roland said slowly. Even if Garcia could not do it, the Clover Group could. For such a large and powerful family business, it was not difficult for them to fill in a few illegal accounts. Apparently, Garcia had also thought of this. After struggling for a while, she let out a long sigh and said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you." Before Roland could speak, Garcia continued, "I've left my family and said I'd never see my father again. Moreover, the Clover Group still wants to demolish the apartment. If I go to him, he'll definitely make a big deal out of it. If that happens, there may be a rift in the protest team that supports me because of their trust in me." He wanted to say something more, but when he saw Garcia's clenched fists, he swallowed his words. She was sad that she could not help a stranger. This made Roland feel a little guilty. "I understand. But you can talk to him in person." Garcia raised her head and said, "Tomorrow night, my father will invite outstanding martialists to a hotel in the city center. Although he knows I won't go, he still sent me an invitation. This will at least show the media that he's still trying to save his family." She put on a ridiculous expression and said, "Although it's not your name on the invitation, you can enter the venue as a substitute. As long as I call the organizer, you can enter the venue with the invitation. The good thing about a substitute is that it can be either acceptance or rejection. If I choose you as my substitute, it will undoubtedly mean that I refuse." Roland immediately understood what Garcia meant. If Garcia invited his master, Lon, to attend the banquet, it would be the opposite in the eyes of others. It was like sending a gift to congratulate him, but sending a gift away would be a taunt. "Talk to him in person," Roland said while touching his chin. "What's wrong? Are you scared?" "You have to go even if you're scared. You've already done so much." Compared to his status as the king of Grey Castle, this kind of banquet was just a small event for Roland. "I'm more worried that I'll have to go back empty-handed. After all, this kind of rejection is tantamount to ridicule them. Don't worry. My father is not an unreasonable person. In business, especially in transactions, he only cares about profits," Garcia said with a smile. "And you're not an ordinary martialist. Even the Prism City has noticed your growth. Don't underestimate yourself." Roland vaguely understood what Garcia meant. "I'll try my best. To be honest, I'm very happy." Garcia stood up and reached out her right hand to him. "It turns out that you've never deviated from the path in your heart. On the contrary, I misunderstood you. I owe you this. I'm sincerely proud to have a martialist like you as my fighting partner." She paused for a moment and then said, "Also, if you need my help in the future, just tell me. Don't call me Miss Garcia anymore. It doesn't suit you." Roland slowly reached out his hand and held hers. Although most of what he said was a lie, he did not forget his goal for a moment. He wanted to break the shackles of the divine will, discover the truth of the world, and save mankind from the endless battle of destiny. Chapter 1147. Due to the difference in the flow of time, they could sleep for 2 days at a time. The next day, after arranging for the gods' punishment witches, Roland drove the 3 witches to the Crown Hotel in the center of the city for the banquet. "Your Majesty, can we really eat whatever we want there?" Dawnan poked her head out from the back seat and asked, her eyes shining. "Of course. It's no different from a banquet held by the nobles. You must have attended many banquets like this in the Union, right? But we can't eat whatever we want at those banquets. Can't we?" Roland asked curiously. Saint Miron, who was sitting in the passenger seat, nodded. Those who are invited to the banquet are all important people. Making friends is more important than eating. No one wants to talk to someone with a greasy mouth. Eating without restraint will only invite ridicule. If the banquet is long, most people will choose to eat first before going to the banquet. She swallowed her saliva and said, "If this behavior will damage His Majesty's reputation, we can totally tolerate it." Roland glanced at the three witches through the rearview mirror and could not help laughing. "Don't worry. When have I ever gone back on my word? This is not the Union, nor is it the King's City of Grey Castle. We're playing the role of ordinary people. As long as we don't disturb others, we can eat whatever we want. Then, can I sneak some food back?" Dodo asked excitedly. There are many sisters who also want to experience the standard of banquets in this world. "Just don't be discovered," Roland said casually. "When the time comes, follow me. Don't stray too far away from me. If anyone tries to talk to you, just pretend you didn't hear it. I'll deal with it." "Yes, Your Majesty," the three witches said in unison. About half an hour later, they arrived at their destination. As soon as they entered the door, Roland felt the difference. Almost all the luxury cars parked around the front yard of the hotel were worth at least $1 million. The clean paint on the cars was as shiny as a mirror. In contrast, the van he drove was quite eye-catching. Although robbing fallen evils made a lot of money, it was still several orders of magnitude lower than that of a real capitalist. In order not to attract attention, the van he bought was only an ordinary brand, which would not attract much attention no matter where he went. However, here he was the most eye-catching one. "Sir, the hotel doesn't accept outsiders today. May I ask if you have an invitation letter?" After parking the car at the entrance, the receptionist quickly walked up. Roland took out the card Garcia had given him and waved it in front of him. "Welcome to the Crown Hotel. The venue is on the top floor, and there are people in the lobby to receive you." The man smiled warmly and said, "Please let me park your car." Roland sighed inwardly. No matter what these people thought, they were still polite on the surface. When he led the witches into the magnificent lobby, the three witches were much calmer than he had expected. Perhaps spacious and bright buildings were not rare in the tequila era. After all, stones of lighting were once common in the upper echelons of the witch empire. For example, the crystal chandelier overhead, which looked very expensive, was probably just an ordinary item in the palace where the three chiefs resided. Roland was amused when he thought that the magnificent decoration was not even comparable to a few cream cakes. The appearance of the witches immediately attracted the attention of several people. It seemed that no matter which world they were in, their appearance was enough to attract people's attention. After a more detailed inspection, the receptionist scanned the card and reported to him through the walkie-talkie. Then she handed the invitation card back to him. "Mr. Roland, sorry to keep you waiting. May I ask if these three ladies are your cousin?" Roland shrugged and said, "Garcia told me that relatives are allowed to enter the hotel." "I see. Please follow me." The receptionist escorted them into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. She then placed her hand on her chest and saluted outside the door. "Have a good time tonight." After a while, the elevator suddenly lit up. The wall that surrounded them suddenly disappeared under their feet. The afterglow of the setting sun shone into the elevator, and at the same time, a city full of tall buildings came into view. The buildings formed an unbroken horizon. Even as far as the eye could see, there were still rows of walls of buildings. Only then did the witches exclaim in a low voice. "Even the three holy cities combined are not as big as this city," Donan said in a low voice. "No matter how many times I see it, it's hard to imagine that mortals without magic power could create all this. The miracle building that you want to build is also for commemoration, right?" Saint Miron looked at Roland. He smiled noncommittally. Although he had never told anyone about his origin except for Anna, it was common knowledge among the tequila witches that he came from a place similar to the dream world. Otherwise, they could not explain why he was so familiar with this incredible world. When they arrived at the top floor, a large circular banquet hall appeared in front of them. Apart from the ground, the walls and the dome were almost entirely made of glass. Standing by the wall, they could have a panoramic view of most of the city, as if they were looking down at all the mountains in the city. The fact that the Clover Group was able to hold a banquet in such a place showed how powerful the Clover Group was. The dining table in the hall was filled with all kinds of food, from cold dishes to pastries, fruits to champagne towers. The guests gathered in groups of 2s and 3s, and there were hundreds of them. Obviously, they were not only martial artists, but also businessmen and politicians. In the past, he would have been very reserved in such a high-class banquet, but now, Roland had already gotten used to it. After entering the hall, he led the witches straight to the main topic, the dishes on the table in the back. Wow, this fish is so tender. It feels like it's melting in my mouth. Are these really grapes? I haven't tasted such sweetness for a long time. Don't talk nonsense. You just came to the dream world last month, right? But last time, we only had fast food. That idiot Elena only ordered kaifeng dishes and lanlo. Hey, don't just eat. Put something in Duodwa's pocket, okay? Roland looked at the excited witches, who were swallowing their saliva, and shook his head with a smile. He suddenly felt that even if the dream world could not bring him any benefits, he should let this place continue to exist. For him, this place might be the realm of nothingness, but for the survivors of Tequila, it was the only place where they could feel that they were still alive. The taste, the touch, the smell. They could only be compensated here for everything they had lost in the fight against the demons. Before the banquet officially began, Roland carefully looked at the other guests. Basically, the guests were divided into 2 groups. Those who wore formal clothes were the members of society, while those who wore the robes of the Martialist Association were basically his peers. Although this division was not necessarily accurate, for example, because he had just become an official member, he had not been issued a robe and could only wear formal clothes to attend the banquet. But in general, no one in the hall was dressed strangely, which was completely different from the scene he had seen in the Prism City last time. Is this the difference between the awakened in the academy and the awakened in the wild? He could not help but think of what Garcia had said. Although the Martialist Association is an organization that aspires to save the world, ideals alone are not enough to gather enough people. That's why the Martialist tournament came into being. Less than 50 years after its birth, it has already become the most watched competition in the world. Through the competition, the awakened ones could gain more exposure, fame, and income. The competition also injected countless new blood into the association. This caused the martial arts competition to become more and more important in the association. Those who performed well would also have a higher say in the matter. This change even caused disagreements among the upper echelons, and the members of the association gradually divided into the old and the new. But in the end, the Martialist tournament did not shrink, but further expanded. At that time, Roland was more inclined to the old faction. After all, the real enemy of the Martialists was the fallen evils, who would fight to the death. This kind of battle was not comparable to competitive sports. As a means to attract new blood, it could be said to be a good and effective method, but it was difficult to understand why it was allowed to affect the upper echelons. The Martialist tournament was not the same as a life-and-death battle. Such a simple truth should be understood by those people, but from the result, the new faction had the upper hand. He had always been unable to understand the reason behind it, but now that he saw the scene in the hall, he suddenly understood a little. The members of the association who did not participate in the Martialist tournament were basically the desperate wild awakened. They were disobedient and had a terrible image. Their overall quality was not at the same level as these star Martialists. Moreover, the opportunity to fight the fallen evils was not always available, and they could die if they were not careful, which inevitably led to fewer and fewer voices supporting the old faction. He was afraid that the old faction would not be able to return to the leading position until the erosion officially broke out. Thinking of the hunting license, Roland could not help but twitch the corner of his mouth. He had always felt that it was strange for the association to issue such a thing to a newcomer who had just joined the association for half a year. No matter how outstanding his performance was, he should not have been able to enter the top 100 of the association. But now it seemed that not participating in the martialist tournament, wholeheartedly opposing the fallen evils, and not seeking fame or profit, was a perfect match for the old faction. Chapter 1148. While Roland was sizing up the crowd, someone in the crowd was also sizing him up. "So, did you find anything about him?" Carwin asked his subordinate in a low voice. "Yes," the subordinate whispered. "His family background is very ordinary. It was only a coincidence that he became Miss Roland's neighbor. There's no record of Roland on the martial arts ranking list, so he should have never participated in a match. It's been 3 months since he joined the Martialist Association. It's not a common situation." Although Carwin had not awakened the force of nature, he was no stranger to the Martial Arts League. As the most popular event, most people were familiar with its rules and regulations. Except for the Martialist Tournament, which was held once every 2 years, all the other tournaments could be regarded as tryouts. They were so varied that even the newly awakened could participate in a junior tournament every month. Generally speaking, a rookie who had just joined the association would be eager to compete on the stage in order to improve his ability and ranking. After all, it meant a higher status and income. Only those awakened ones who joined the awakened halfway would be resistant to this kind of competition where they could display their abilities in public. Of course, the credibility of this reason was also questionable. He believed that those arrogant fellows had committed crimes and were unwilling to expose themselves in front of the camera. As Garcia's elder brother, Carwin was naturally very concerned about his sister's surrogate. As far as he knew, Garcia was definitely not a person who was easy to get close to. Because she was so persistent in her beliefs, there was an invisible wall between her and others. If they wanted to cross it, it would be extremely stressful for both of them. Therefore, there were very few people who could win her trust. Carwin was not surprised that Garcia had fallen out with her father. She might be a qualified martialist, but she was definitely not a qualified businesswoman. However, this was not the only reason why he investigated Garcia. It was just one of the reasons. The other main reason was the VIP seats in the front of the banquet hall. He looked towards the first row of seats, only to see a woman dressed entirely in white sitting there. She wore a martial arts robe that didn't have any decorations on it, which made her seem even more ethereal and refined. Her long black hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall. Just looking at her back was enough to amaze people. Fei Yuhan was the most dazzling star of the martial competition. It had only been 5 years since her debut, but she had already made it to the finals of the martial competition twice. Although she had yet to win the championship, most people thought that it was just because she was too young and inexperienced. As long as she had enough time, the title of the strongest would definitely be hers. With such outstanding talent, she was regarded as the representative of the new generation of geniuses. It was even rumored that the day she won the championship would be the day she would enter the upper echelons of the Prism City. Carrie had thought that a person like her would ignore the Clover Group's invitation. She had not expected that she would attend the banquet in person, which surprised her father. With Fei Yuhan's attendance, this banquet would definitely become the most eye-catching headline in recent times. However, when he finally found a chance to talk, he was entrusted with an unexpected task. Carwin suppressed his distracting thoughts and slowly walked up to the man. "Miss Fei Yuhan, the thing you asked me to find out, you don't have to repeat yourself." "I heard everything," she interrupted, then smiled. "Thank you." "Did you hear that?" Carwin looked back in surprise at where he had come from. He was almost 10 meters away from her, and he was in the noisy banquet hall. Could a martialist really have such acute senses? She was simply inhuman. Of course not. Even if my ears could hear everything, my brain wouldn't be able to process it. Fei Yuhan probably noticed his bewilderment and explained, which she rarely did. "When your subordinates approached you, I intentionally increased my vigilance. After that, as long as you concentrate, you can reconstruct the entire conversation through the shape of your mouth, your voice, and your facial expressions. It's not difficult for most martialists to do so." You're indeed the strongest martialist, Carwin said with an uneasy smile. The strongest? Her voice was as melodious as a wind chime. I haven't won that trophy yet. Sooner or later, it's just a matter of time. Apart from you, who else can step into the ring of the martial competition in the first year of their awakening? Even the defender of the Prism City. Carwin's voice gradually trailed off. Even though Fei Yuhan looked like she was listening, the faint smile on her face made him feel as though he was being ignored. It was as though she was just being polite, but in reality, she was not interested in what he was saying and did not want to continue the conversation any further. He suddenly realized that Fei Yuhan's "thank you" actually meant that the conversation was over. The latter part of the explanation was just for the sake of the organizer, the Clover Group, but it was only enough for him to say a few more words. Thinking of this, Carwin could not help but feel angry. He, who was sought after everywhere he went, had never been treated like this. However, just as his anger rose, Carwin forcibly suppressed it. The Clover Group could not afford to offend the Martialist Association. It was closely related to the national government and various industries. Otherwise, his father would not have spent so much money to befriend these people. He forced a smile, turned around, and left the VIP area. Of course, this slight change in his expression did not escape Fei Yuhan's eyes. However, she did not care about what these ordinary people thought. In the face of the erosion, wealth and power were of limited importance. The only thing they could rely on was their own strength. She looked in the direction of Roland again. She had agreed to attend the banquet because she was following her master's instructions. She did not know why she would waste her precious training time to attend such a social event. It was not until the appearance of that man that her attention was drawn. When the Awaken's heart of nature reached a certain level, they would be able to roughly sense the level of their opponents. This was not due to some special ability, but a comprehensive manifestation of the improvement of their observation skills. Fei Yuhan had reached this level 3 years ago. She also found that as long as they were not in the Prism City, there were only a few people who could surpass her. However, her observation skills were useless in front of that man. His movements, intonation, gaze, and the slight trembling of his skin were no different from that of an ordinary person. The only thing that she could not sense was the fluctuation of the heart of nature. Without this, she would not be able to judge. It would not be strange if the man was just an ordinary person. However, judging from the waiter's hospitality, he was a martialist. Fei Yuhan went to find Carmen. Although she could check the ranking information herself, she preferred to let others handle the trivial matters. As long as she gave them a simple order, they would do their best to complete the task and usually do it better. Then, she heard the name Roland from Carmen's mouth. All her doubts were solved. A week ago, Fei Yuhan learned from her master that a new hunter had been born in the Prism City. He was a martialist with a hunting license. This was not surprising. In order to fight against the evil fallen evils, the martialists had to be given the power to go beyond their limits. This way, they could eliminate their enemies more efficiently. Generally speaking, there were not many people who could become hunters. The few that she knew were seniors who could be called out by their names. However, the hunting license this time was given to a new member who had just joined the association not long ago. If the identity of a hunter had not been classified as top secret by the association, it would have caused a huge uproar. The association usually regarded the holder of the hunting license and the champion of the martial arts tournament as martial artists of the same level. Sometimes, the former's status was even higher. The award this time also meant that someone had picked up the league championship trophy as soon as he awakened. What an incredible thing! If that was the case, it was not worth mentioning that she had made it to the finals 2 times in a row. The name of the hunter was Roland. Fei Yuhan stretched out her right hand expressionlessly and clenched it into a fist. As a disciple of an old guard, she had heard about the conflict between the new and the old factions. One of the most controversial and unanswered questions was, which kind of martialist was stronger? Was it a fighter who walked on the edge of death and used all means to fight against the fallen evils? Or was it a fighter who honed his skills every day and competed fairly with different opponents in the same arena? The former was more of a test of one's ability, but it was difficult to fight against the fallen evils even once in several months. For many people, their first battle was their last. Although the latter could spend a lot of time on cultivation, the rules set out for safety reasons not only limited the martialist's performance, but also formed habits in their thoughts and actions. When encountering a relentless opponent, it was easy to get flustered. There were many supporters of the two theories, but it was difficult to find an answer through practice. Now, there seemed to be a standard to measure it. Roland, who had never participated in a martial arts contest and had been fighting fallen evils since his awakening, undoubtedly belonged to the old faction. Fei Yuhan, on the other hand, belonged to the new faction. This was probably why her master had asked her to attend this banquet. As a fellow member of the association and the representative of the two factions, it was always good to get acquainted with her. Unfortunately, Fei Yuhan had no interest in the conflict of ideas. She did not even consider herself a new faction. If her master had not strictly forbidden her to deal with the erosion alone, she would have fought against a few fallen evils. Just like Roland. From the beginning to the end, she only cared about who was stronger. Fortunately, Roland did not disappoint her. If it were any other martialist in the hall, Fei Yuhan would have simulated the outcome of different battles in her mind. Regardless of whether she attacked first or was attacked first, she would be able to estimate her chances of winning. However, she could not determine Roland's level, so she could not simulate the battle. In other words, the two were still tied. Fei Yuhan slightly raised the corner of her mouth. This banquet would not be so boring after all. Moreover, she had also heard some interesting conversations from the three girls who were traveling with them. For example, Dream World. For example, Your Majesty. Is this some kind of novel game? But looking at the girls' expressions, it doesn't seem to be some kind of vulgar roleplay. If I have the chance, I can ask him face to face. Fei Yuhan retracted her gaze and silently committed these questions to memory. After plundering every table, Roland finally found the person he was looking for. Chapter 1149. That man is... Dawnan mumbled while stuffing a pastry into her mouth. Yes, he's the same as the photo I saw in the newspaper. Roland nodded slightly. He had done his homework before coming here and had a basic understanding of the Clover Group. It was Guard, a member of the board of directors of the Clover Group and the president of the construction department. He ranked fifth in the family and was also Garcia's father. He had thought that he would see Wimbledon 3, but it turned out that Zero did not devour the poor king of Grey Castle. At the same time, he also confirmed that the residents in the Soul Building had been completely accepted by the dream world and formed a self-consistent set of memories and interpersonal relationships. As for whether Garcia or Guard came first, whether the Clover Group was created based on Garcia's existence, or whether Garcia was randomly selected into the Clover Group's network, it was impossible to know. If he did not have all the memories of the other world, he would probably treat everything here as real. Although the dream world was evolving in a direction that he did not understand, at least the foundation of the world was still based on his memories. Therefore, there was a sense of disharmony everywhere. This, on the contrary, made Roland feel a little relieved. The elements that had been forcibly pieced together were constantly reminding him that he was in a dream. For example, Garcia's surname was Wimbledon, but in this world, her surname was Guard. Such small changes could be seen everywhere. If Cobb in the movie Inception needed a personal item as a totem to distinguish whether the world he was in was a dream or not, Guard would not be so confused. Guard's speech was nothing more than to thank the martialists for their attendance and support. In the end, he also mentioned his daughter, who had severed ties with him. As Garcia had guessed, Guard's tone was full of regret for his daughter's absence, and he expressed his willingness to have a talk with her at any time. There was another round of applause from the audience, and the cameras in the reporters' hands flashed at the perfect time. Only Roland sneered inwardly. After all, as long as he gave up the renovation plan of the apartment or gave her sufficient compensation, Garcia would not have made a fuss with him. After the speech, it was time for a toast. Roland had been waiting for this moment. Let's go. We'll come back later. He gestured to the witch, picked up a glass of champagne, and walked toward Guard. Mr. He, thank you for coming tonight. I'll need your support for the Green Space project in the future. You're flattering me. We've been working together for so long. Why are you still being so polite? Miss Yuhan, are you satisfied with the new dojo built by 3 Leaves in the Southern District? I've never been there. But, you will definitely be able to stand on it this year. When Guard walked out of the noisy crowd after toasting the guests in the front row, Roland stepped in front of him and blocked his way. You are? The other party was visibly taken aback. Roland, Garcia's representative, he answered straightforwardly. Oh, it's you. Nice to meet you. Guard's expression quickly returned to normal. He turned around and picked up a glass of wine from the waiter. Those who can awaken the force of nature are all born lucky. I really envy you young and promising people. Roland clinked glasses with him but did not drink the champagne. I have something to talk to you in private. Roland's words were somewhat rude. In terms of age, Roland was obviously an elder, and in terms of social status, a director of a large corporation was not much lower than a celebrity martial artist, not to mention a newcomer like Roland who had just entered the industry. Guard could not help but frown. Sorry, I have other guests to entertain. Garcia asked me to come to you. Don't you want to know how your daughter is doing? Roland raised his voice slightly. From the corner of his eye, he saw that some reporters had noticed what was going on. He knew that Guard would definitely agree. Otherwise, he would not be able to maintain his image of caring about his daughter. All right. Guard chose to give in. If it's not too long. Of course, it won't take you long. Roland smiled. There was such a private VIP room in the banquet hall. After the attendants left, only Guard, his secretary, and Roland were left in the room. Is it okay to keep him here? Roland glanced at the old secretary. What I'm about to say involves your interests. Of course. He's a member of my family and has been with me for decades, Guard said in a low voice. Guard said in a deep voice. But are you sure you want to talk to these 3 beautiful, little girls? This is not an amusement park. Now that there was no need to pretend, the secretary looked obviously impatient, and his tone was no longer as polite as before. I see, Roland thought. Considering that he had the force of nature, the secretary would definitely be on guard. Although the man was old, judging from his movements and standing position, he was most likely an awakened as well. Because what I want to talk about is about these 3 girls. Roland shrugged. To make a long story short, it's a deal. They're unregistered residents, and I need you to register them as legal residents and arrange for them to study in a good high school. After a moment of silence, Guard said, Is this what you want to talk to me about? If Roland was an ordinary person, his first reaction would be, Are you King kidding me? His second reaction would be to turn hostile and leave. The fact that he could still control his temper showed that he was a good businessman. That's right, Roland said confidently. It shouldn't be a problem for the Clover Group. You said it's a deal. What can you give me in return? Do you want me to stand up against Garcia, or do you want her to give up fighting against the group and give up the tube-shaped building for the new project? I'm her friend. How could I do such a thing? In fact, after discovering the secret of the memory fragments, the tube-shaped building had become the object that Roland was determined to protect. Any construction team that wanted to demolish the building would have to face the attacks of 300 tequila witches. For example, it was a piece of cake for them to tear down the tracks of an excavator overnight, or to make the construction site haunted. Oh, friends? Guard sneered. Then we have nothing to talk about. Not necessarily. Roland took out the hunting license from his pocket and waved it in front of Guard. This is... Guard's expression changed instantly. He quickly turned to look at the old secretary. The secretary stared at the license for a long time and nodded slowly. It's real. How did you get this? That's a secret of the association. You have no right to know, Roland interrupted Guard. After all, even he did not know how the association carried out the application, verification, and issuance of the license. You just need to understand what it means. Guard stared at him for a long time. He took out a cigar from his pocket and seemed to want to smoke it. After fiddling with it for a long time, he finally put it away. It seems that my daughter has met someone extraordinary. But Mr. Roland, the Martialist Association is a law-abiding organization. Do you think I'm threatening you? Roland sighed deliberately. As I said before, this is a deal. Then what you mean is, there will always be some indescribable obstacles when it comes to business. It's easier to deal with those in the open, but it's not so easy to deal with those in the dark. Am I right? Roland held up a finger. A chance to solve the problem. That's the price I'm offering. But not just anyone. First, the target must be the criminal. Second, the target must not be in the open. Finally, the target must be a threat to you. I have a way to verify the above 3 points, so don't take any chances. In this way, the association will not care too much about this matter. Of course, it's best if the higher-ups know nothing about it. To put it simply, it was a gangster leader. Such a person usually had a large number of subordinate gangs under his control. Normally, it would take a long time to collect evidence, set up an ambush, arrest, and trial, during which the company might suffer a huge loss. It would be much easier to solve the problem by violence. Judging from the look in Guard's eyes, Roland knew that he must have encountered several similar cases. Guard hesitated for a moment. Mr. Roland, if you're serious, then the value of the 3 accounts is not equal. Roland could not help but chuckle. Garcia was right. Don't worry, my father is not an unreasonable person. When it comes to business, especially transactions, the only thing he cares about is his own interests. Now, he knew when to advance and when to retreat. You can take it as a deposit to reach an agreement. The 3 people with me are just the first batch. There should be about 300 people in total. 300. Illegal accounts? Guard said hesitantly. The police will definitely notice. Take your time. I don't want you to complete it in a short time. 1 year, 2 years, or even several years won't be a problem. After all, this agreement is valid for a long time. According to Celine, not everyone could concentrate on studying. For people like Elena and Phyllis, it would be better for them to follow him to rob fallen evils to earn a living. In that case, I might be able to do it. Then let's have a pleasant cooperation. After the old secretary took photos of the witches, the deal was sealed. Although it would not write down any written contract, Roland knew that it would not easily break its promise. When he was about to leave the room with the 3 witches, Guard suddenly stopped him. Wait. Anything else? Roland turned around. How's my daughter, Garcia, doing? Guard hesitated for a moment before he asked. I've called her many times, but she didn't answer. Don't worry, she's having a good time, Roland replied. Looking at the closed door, Guard finally lit a cigar. After a long while, he asked in a low voice, Is this man really just an ordinary person? I have the same feeling. The silent secretary nodded. That kind of high and mighty attitude doesn't seem to be faked. Ordinary people usually showed timidity, flattery, arrogance, and pretended to be tough in front of him. This was caused by the gap in age, wealth, and social status. The force of nature could not change a person's temperament, especially for a newly awakened person like Roland. However, Guard did not see any discomfort in Roland. Instead, Roland looked natural, relaxed, and looked down on him as if he had been in this situation countless times. But how could this be possible? Guard was about the same age as Garcia, in his 20s. For the first time, Guard found that he could not see through a person at all. You shouldn't have made such a deal, Saint Miron muttered after leaving the cubicle. After leaving the cubicle, Saint Miron muttered, You are the king of 2 worlds. The way he looked at you was too rude. If Lady Alethea was here, she would have put her sword to his neck, Dodo echoed. Since he's the king, he should do whatever he wants, Donnan objected. Just like Lady Alice, she doesn't care about other people's opinions. Roland did not know whether to laugh or cry when he heard these words coming out of the mouth of the little girl, who looked so different from him. Well, it's because my minister can't enter the dream world. And as I said, don't call me your majesty. Yes, Brother Roland, the three witches immediately corrected themselves. By the way, are we going back now? Dawnin looked at the buffet at the back of the hall and unconsciously licked her lips. The banquet will probably last until late at night, but it's not good to keep the other witches waiting for too long. Roland looked up at the darkening sky with amusement. Let's eat for half an hour and leave at 8 o'clock sharp. Yes, your majesty. The three witches looked at each other and excitedly ran to the table. They really look like underage children, Roland could not help sighing in his heart. He followed them slowly and picked up the glass of champagne that he had not touched. When he was about to drink it, he remembered that he had driven here, so he had no choice but to put it down reluctantly. Just as he raised it up and put it down, the pale golden champagne suddenly changed. A bright red undercurrent appeared out of thin air, like ink dripping into a glass, spreading out in circles along the swirling wine, but it did not dye the champagne the same red color. Instead, it gradually condensed into a line of distorted text, appearing extremely abrupt and strange. Don't forget, our agreement. It was a short sentence, but it made Roland break out in a cold sweat. He subconsciously wanted to throw the glass away, but he forcibly suppressed his impulse the moment the glass left his hand. He pulled it back so hard that it even cracked the leg of the glass. Chapter 1150. Roland felt an indescribable chill enveloping his body. As expected, he was being watched by someone in this supposedly illusory dream world. He raised his head and quickly scanned the people around him. Who? A waiter? An entrepreneur? An awakened? The banquet hall was still bustling with people enjoying the party. The only abnormal person seemed to be Roland himself. Roland took a deep breath and slowly calmed his racing heart. The agreement could not be referring to anything else. The messenger of the message should be the same person who left the note in the book. Rose Cafe, number 302. There was no doubt that someone wanted to see him. This kind of means was beyond the scope of the force of nature. Martialists were not witches, and they were not good at all kinds of abilities. The awakened ones had stronger strength, speed, and 5 senses. When they practiced to a certain extent, they could also release their cyclones, which were similar to spells. But generally speaking, they were more inclined to the combat type. Moreover, he had not sensed any fluctuation of the force of nature around him. In other words, the crafty trick that made the words appear was probably from a more advanced power. The dream world was constantly evolving into an unknown realm, which might have something to do with this. I'm really being watched by an NPC, Roland muttered self-deprecatingly. As a world where time would completely stop when he was awake, it was really difficult for him to relate to reality. Except for the foreign witches and the defeated people who had been devoured by Zero, he subconsciously thought that the rest of the people in the dream world should be imaginary. No matter how real they were, they lacked the key, self. But now, a fabricator noticed his difference and took the initiative to send him a message. When did it start? Was it when he borrowed the internal books of the association from Garcia, or when he found in the reflection church that the figure from 800 years ago was exactly the same as Lon in the dream world? Or was it earlier than that, like the moment when Zero pulled him into the soul battlefield? He could not think of an answer. Even if he knew, it would be meaningless. The most important thing was what the other party wanted to say. Brother Roland? Donan's voice interrupted his thoughts. What happened? No, nothing. Roland snapped back to reality and shook his head with a smile. I'll be right there. After confirming that there was nothing wrong with the wine glass, he placed it on the nearest table and walked towards the witches. This tastes so smooth and tender. Even if you have to wait, you should give it a try. Saint Miron handed him a skewer of freshly grilled foie gras, and the enticing aroma of the grease wafted over. Roland followed her gaze and couldn't help but cover his face. He saw the 3 witches standing guard in front of the 3 tables that needed to be freshly cooked, taking all the food that the chef had just cooked into their hands. They had the posture of, "This place has already been occupied by me." The surrounding men were still fine. None of them would snatch food from the hands of the young ladies, but the ladies were rather disgruntled. With his excellent hearing, he heard some intermittent whispers coming from the surroundings. "Who brought them here? They're so cute, but why do they look like they've never eaten anything good? Look at their clothes and shoes. Did they sneak in? TSK, they look like they've been starving for hundreds of years." After hearing these complaints, Roland wanted to tell them to restrain themselves, but he swallowed his words and turned around to glare at the group of people who were gossiping behind him. "Sorry, they really haven't tasted food for hundreds of years. Don't forget to bring some for your family." "Oh!" Biting into the foie gras skewer handed to him by the witches, Roland resumed his previous train of thought. Since the other party had such an ability, why didn't they talk to him face to face? Why did they have to make it so awkward and make it seem like a riddle? Were they afraid of scaring him, or did they lack some kind of opportunity? If it was the former, the words would appear in the wine without warning. If it were someone with a weak heart, he would have died immediately. As for the latter, his mind involuntarily recalled the contents of the note. "The day the divine will appears, the appointed time to meet." Roland silently repeated it several times in his heart. Suddenly, he could not help but gasp. Could it be? Was the other party referring to the day the bloody moon appeared in the real world? The appearance of the bloody moon also meant the beginning of the battle of divine will. Only at this time could the messenger talk to him? But how did the people in the dream world know what was happening in the other world? As long as he did not enter the dream world, this world would always be in a frozen state. What made him speechless was that even if the opportunity was as he had guessed, the location was still a mystery. Who knew which corner of the city the Rose Café was located in? Couldn't they have chosen a tube-shaped apartment or a well-known landmark as the meeting place? Just as Roland was silently cursing, two middle-aged men who looked like bosses walked past him. "I heard that your golf course is about to start construction? It was approved a while ago and cost me a lot of money. Why, President Gao, are you interested?" "Not really. I don't usually exercise. I'm more interested in the master you found. I heard that you spent more than 3 million on him. I had no choice but to ask for good luck. People in our line of work only hope that everything goes smoothly. We can earn more money after we spend it. It's said that the names he sets are very effective. What's the last name?" "The Rhine Green Field. It's just across the river from the Clover Group's Greenfield project." "Ha! That's quite a coincidence." Roland could not help but be slightly stunned. He did not hear what the two men said after that. Names can be chosen by oneself. He had been secretly asking the witches to look for the Rose Café, but he had neglected this point. What if he opened a café and named it Rose? If the other party really wanted to contact him, they should not have chosen a place that he had never heard of. On the other hand, since the other party could directly display the words in the wine glass in his hand, it should not be difficult for them to find out that he opened a café. He had already rented the second floor of the warehouse. As long as he rented the two shops next door, he would have enough space to set up the café. He could even go one step further. Other than the bar counter, tables, chairs, and other necessary facilities, he could just set up a private room and set the nameplate as 302. With the addition of the tequila witches, he could say that he had both waiters and customers. Who said that a café could not sell its own food? After calculating the funds on hand, Roland quickly made a decision. After Roland left the banquet hall, Fei Yuhan walked to the table at the back and picked up the glass of champagne. She saw with her own eyes that the association's new hunter threw the glass of champagne with a shocked expression, but at the last moment he caught it back. It was as if he was not holding champagne, but a piece of burning charcoal. For a moment, she even saw a trace of panic on his face. What could cause a hunter to panic? She could not imagine it. For people like him who constantly walked on the edge of life and death, even death would not cause him to panic. Not to mention a cup of ordinary wine? But Fei Yuhan knew that it was not an illusion. There were obvious cracks on the bottom of the glass, a sign that he had lost control of his strength. Generally speaking, Only a newcomer who had just awakened the force of nature would make such a mistake. From this, it could be inferred that what he saw was not ordinary. Fei Yuhan lifted the glass and gently sniffed it, but did not find any residual smell. Roland had not drunk this glass of champagne, which meant that the thing that surprised him had nothing to do with the wine. She slowly drank the wine in the glass and confirmed her judgment. It was just ordinary wine. Compared to the childish conversation between Roland and the three girls, such as, King of the Two Worlds, and my minister, she was more concerned about his reaction when he was caught off guard. Only when he inadvertently revealed his actions could he not lie. Something must have happened at that time. Chapter 1151. The next morning, when Roland walked out of his bedroom and into the castle hall, the tequila witches, who had just disconnected, raised their elbows to greet him with the highest etiquette of the Union. "Good morning, Your Majesty. Thank you for your hospitality. Last night was the best experience I've had in a century. I'll look forward to my next reunion with the Dreamland in the final battle." "What happened last night?" Anna asked curiously after the gods' punishment witches left the castle with happy and contented faces. "A sumptuous, high-end banquet," Roland said with a smile. With Donan's help, Dodo had gobbled up nearly half of the food on the table. Fortunately, a banquet of this scale would not care about how much the guests had eaten. Even if the food was thrown away, it would be immediately refilled. If it had been an ordinary buffet, the waiters would have long been eyeing the food. After all, according to the consumption rate of the invisible pocket, even 10 mouths would not be enough. "You're making me hungry." Anna's stomach rumbled. "When can I eat those things?" Looking at her blue eyes full of expectation, Roland could not help but reach out to touch her head. "In a few years you'll definitely be able to eat." High-end delicacies were mainly reflected in the ingredients. Modern people could enjoy delicacies from all over the world because of the developed transportation network. If they wanted to eat fresh sea urchins from the port of Clearwater in Neverwinter, they would have to travel at least 2 or 3 times faster on the inland river. Of course, even if they could not meet the requirements in a short time, as long as they could drive the demons out of the fertile plains, they could take the Seagull to various places in Grey Castle for their honeymoon and enjoy the local delicacies. Breakfast was the usual eggs, bread, and a cup of chaos drink. For Roland, who had also eaten and drunk in the Dreamland, it was not very tempting. But when he remembered that the tequila witches still had to rely on high-heat dry food to replenish their energy consumption, he ate everything on the plate. After breakfast, Anna quickly said goodbye to him and set off for the North Slope Research Laboratory. Whether in Neverwinter or at the front, she rarely had free time. In fact, most of the members of the Witch Union were the same. Returning to the French window in his office, he could see familiar figures passing by from time to time in the vestibule. The witches had completely integrated into the city and were building the future they wanted together with the ordinary people. At this moment, Nightingale pushed open the door and walked in. A letter from the garrison at Festive Harbor. She placed a thick paper bag on the desk. "I saw Sean holding this when I was downstairs, so I brought it over." "So heavy." Roland picked up the paper cutter. "It should have been sent by sea." Nightingale walked behind him and took out a bag of dried fish from the drawer. "I've checked it, and I didn't find anything strange." Roland opened the package and poured out its contents. Other than the letter and a stack of sketches, there were also a few sealed bags of stones. From the looks of it, it was basically similar to the sample that Rex presented previously. Roland quickly skimmed through the contents of the letter and could not help but frown. The report from the First Army had shocked him. The so-called ancient ruins were not just a small area like the underwater cave, but a normal one that covered every corner of the sea. Upon receiving his order, the garrison at Festive Harbor immediately took action. Following the instructions of Simbadi, they buried a large number of explosives above the sea cave and directly blew up the entire cave. The enraged giant armored scorpion broke out of the ground and was surrounded by several machine gun squads and mortar squads. It was shot into a hornet's nest before it could crawl out more than 10 steps. This result was not surprising. What really surprised people was the subsequent cleanup and exploration work. According to the survey by the engineering team, the explosives had caused the ground within a radius of hundreds of meters to sink to different depths, which was far more than the effect of the explosives. From the attached sketches, Roland saw that the huge sand surface formed a slippery slope, as if the whole earth had collapsed. After that, the First Army carried out several more explosions and organized people to move sand and dig holes. Finally, they found 16 exploration sites near the festive harbor where the Matchstick Man's relic could be found. If they were connected in a line, the area covered by the Matchstick Man's relic was large enough to contain 7 or 8 harbors. Due to the limited manpower, the Sand Nation could only clean up 3 cave-ins in a month. However, the results were surprisingly similar. The bottom of the desert was covered by a stone tablet wall that was 5 to 10 meters thick, and in the places that were not covered by the stone tablets, there were clusters of sharp green grass. After looking through the lifelike sketches, Roland could not help but fall silent. First of all, he had to admit that this was excellent news. If the stone tablets were used as resources for mining, the more the better. Now that the tracer bullets had been finalized with this news, the large-scale production was guaranteed. Moreover, this strange piezoelectric silicide must have more than one use. Roland could think of pressure gauges, lighters, quartz clocks, and so on. There was also the imitation of the magic ceremony cube. Although the exploration results showed that the number of the radioactive clan's relic was far less than the Matchstick Man's, it was not a big problem to gather a bunch of magic cubes. For example, the samples sent back this time could almost meet Celine's research needs. However, the content hidden in the report was chilling. There were so many stone tablets near the festive harbor. How many stone tablets would there be in the endless cape? If they were the remains of silicon-based creatures, the greater the number, the more tragic the war was. Moreover, the soil structure of the 3 cave-ins was almost the same, indicating that they were formed at the same time. An incredible picture gradually formed in Roland's mind. Perhaps the desertification of the southernmost region was not caused by the lack of water, and the Silver Stream was not an underground river from the beginning. It used to be lush and green, no different from other places on the continent. Until the war spread to this place. An astonishing number of Matchstick Men were killed by the radioactive clan. Their bodies were spread all over the ground. This could be confirmed by the murals in the Temple of the Cursed, where the radioactive clan finally seized the relics of the gods and won the war. The key was that after the Battle of Divine Will, the bodies of silicon-based creatures would not decay as quickly as the bodies of carbon-based creatures. Instead, they would become nutrients for the soil and return to the biosphere. Layers of the bodies were piled up on the grass. The thickness of the bodies might be several stories higher than that of a building. The river was blocked, the forest was crushed, and most plants lost their living space. Only vines could climb up through the cracks and absorb the precious sunlight. The ecology of the southernmost region was destroyed. But nature was always tolerant. Whether organic or inorganic, they would eventually become part of the world. Hundreds of years later, the top layer of the bodies gradually weathered and became sand, which then fell down layer by layer. The sand moved with the wind until all the holes were filled up. During this process, the vines growing in the cracks died one after another. Only in the open space that was not covered by the Matchstick Men survived. The large number of plants resisted the erosion of the sand and turned the gravel into soil again. Hundreds or even thousands of years passed. The countless bodies on the top layer gradually piled up into a desert. They isolated the bodies on the bottom layer from the sea wind and piled up the shoreline more than 10 meters high. The flowing effect of the sand dune kept the pressure on the bottom layer constantly changing. The steels glowed and extinguished again and again. This extremely long alternation could not guarantee the diversity of plants, but it allowed some grasses with a long growth cycle to survive. The open space became the Silver Stream oasis and nurtured the irons and people of the Majin clan. In other words, the current Iron Sand City and the festive harbor were built on weathered corpses. This scene made Roland shudder. He even hoped that he had guessed the wrong direction. If the battle of divine will really had no end, how many people would be sacrificed in this world? Under the earth, in the depths of the sea. Chapter 1152. Hey, Roland. Nightingale's voice pulled him back to reality. Are you okay? What's wrong with me? Roland cleared his throat. You're staring at the blueprint in a daze, and you don't look good. Is there any bad news on it? No, maybe I'm just overthinking it. Roland shook his head and briefly explained his speculation. If this is really the world, then it's really hopeless. A problem that could not be ignored was that thousands of years was a very short period of time for life. When the radiation people and the matchstick people were fighting each other, where were the humans? Where were the demons? If the battle of divine will was endless, then what about the civilizations that won the divine will? No matter how tragic the war was, there would always be a winner. But why were they also missing? At this thought, Roland suddenly felt that the road ahead was much more difficult. I see. Nightingale said thoughtfully. But even if you're right, I think there's still a solution. Roland looked at her in surprise. What solution? First of all, I'm not Anna, so I can't say anything. It's just my personal opinion. Don't laugh, understand? I promise I won't laugh. Nightingale stuffed a piece of dried fish into her mouth. First of all, you have to admit that this is not a problem that can be solved in 1 or 2 generations, right? So the most important thing is to pass on the news until the time is right. That makes sense. Roland nodded. And then? There's no then. He was a little surprised. Because it has nothing to do with us. Nightingale said matter-of-factly, our lifespan is limited. It's not easy to complete the responsibility of this life. Why worry about the future? As for what those people do and whether they succeed or not, it's their responsibility. It's meaningless even if you think about it until your hair turns white. He could not help but grin. Is this comfort? But no matter what, such a simple and straightforward way of thinking was indeed Nightingale's style. Are you going to laugh at my short-sightedness? Nightingale narrowed her eyes. Roland immediately closed his mouth. You've thought it through. That's more like it. She raised her head and said proudly, and if you're worried that the latecomers aren't capable enough and can't shoulder this responsibility, you can always share it with the other clans. Share? What should I do? Building ruins to record the truth of the battle of divine will. This is also a way to transmit information. Didn't you discover the existence of the radiation race and the stickman from the murals in the Temple of the Cursed? Build a few sturdy underground fortresses around Grey Castle and engrave the paintings on the walls to warn the other civilizations that are participating in the war. If enough time passes, I think there will be 1 or 2 races that can wait until the time is right. Roland couldn't help but be startled. Not only could Nightingale's words not be said to be short, they could even be said to be extremely profound. Even if the human race was completely annihilated in the war that determined its fate, it would not be the same as withdrawing from the stage. By using this method to transmit information, as long as there was a winner that jumped out of the framework, the human civilization would definitely be recorded in the history books. Perhaps even she herself didn't realize the significance of this method. After a while, Roland shook his head with a smile and poured her a cup of chaos drink. It's good that you can think of this with your brain. You can omit the first half of the sentence. Although Nightingale said so, she still took the cup without hesitation. Indeed, that was the last and most helpless method. Roland thought to himself. However, if possible, he would prefer humans to be the recorder rather than the symbol to be recorded. After calling Sean and handing him the stone pieces in the bag, Roland threw himself into the day's work. In the afternoon, the person he had been waiting for came to the castle. It was Camilla Derry, the butler of Sleeping Island. Strangely, she did not travel with Tilly, and there was no sign that she had taken care of herself. She still looked travel-worn. This meant that she probably went straight to the castle as soon as she got off the ship and did not even go to the sleeping spell. A bad feeling rose in Roland's heart. You've just arrived in Neverwinter? He made a cup of tea for Camilla. Thank you. How was Thunder's expedition? Camilla drank the tea in one gulp and almost choked. Ahem. Ahem, something happened to the Shadow Islands. Joan, she disappeared. Disappeared? Roland's heart sank. He could not help but exchange a look with Nightingale. Tell me what happened. That's about it. Camilla spent half an hour to tell him the whole story. We waited outside the sea for 2 days, but Joan didn't come back. Thunder said that you were the only one who could possibly know what had happened to Joan underwater. That distorted scene, that floating pillar island. Can it really exist in the real world? How could such a thing happen? Roland could not help rubbing his forehead. The more he learned about the world, the more he felt it was strange. He had thought that the dream was full of incongruities, but now it seemed that the reality was not much better. The elongated stone pillars and fish did not seem to be caused by external forces. The most obvious evidence was that Camilla saw Joan's fingers suddenly lengthen before she was pulled into the deep sea. If she had been pulled out by force, the chief butler, who was in the state of mind resonance, would have felt unbearable pain. But in fact, neither Joan nor Camilla felt any physical discomfort. The only thing he could think of was that the space had been distorted. Although it sounded strange and he had no evidence, he knew he had to say something. Camilla did not go to Tilly first, nor did she wait for her fatigue to recover before reporting to him, because she could not wait to know Joan's safety. Judging from her bloodshot eyes, Roland guessed that she might not have had a good sleep on the way. Camilla was so worried that she probably blamed herself as well. That was to say, even if it was nonsense, he had to come up with something. Fortunately, with the example of the sealine, which was perpendicular to the sea surface, he could not exaggerate too much. Roland rubbed his forehead and thought for a long time before saying, I think Thunder made the right decision. Camilla immediately raised her head. You also think that Joan is still alive? Yes, and she might have gone to the east of the sealine. In the blink of an eye, she traveled thousands of miles. Is this really possible? I'm just guessing. First of all, I'm sure that the water level of the shadow waters has indeed dropped, right? This change can even affect the ebb and flow of the fjord islands. The amount of water must be astonishing. So, where did the falling water go? Roland picked up a quill and drew a circle on the paper. I guess it went to the east of the sealine. Camilla thought for a moment. Thunder seemed to have said that the water near the sealine does flow to the west. Because if it's not replenished, the swirling sea will dry up after 2 or 3 times of low tide. Roland then drew a second circle. The 2 circles were about a palm apart. The problem is that if the water is moved from one place to the other and then poured out, the water should come in waves. But the fact is that the water is constantly moving. To achieve this, we have to pass through the 2 circles in an instant. So, what's the fastest way? Camilla stretched out her hand uncertainly and gestured between the 2 circles. Straight? She asked. In theory. Roland added a straight line between the 2 circles. But there's another possibility. Then he folded the paper so that the 2 circles overlapped. In this way, we can reach the destination in an instant. Camilla gasped. How is this possible? It's indeed beyond common sense. But if it's caused by magic power, it can't be measured by common sense. For example, Nightingale can also teleport over short distances and pass through obstacles that ordinary people can't. The effect is similar to this. The chief butler fell silent. Also, although it's just a hypothesis, the phenomenon you mentioned is very intriguing. Roland inserted the tip of the quill into the circle. For example, this quill went from the front to the back in the blink of an eye, but it actually completed the journey in a straight line. In other words, from the outside, it looks like the fish has traveled thousands of miles in less than a breath. What do you think we'll see? Camilla murmured, shrink, small? That's right. The rule of big near and small far is still in effect. So I think it's not that the fish has been stretched, but that its body is thousands of miles away from you, so it naturally looks thin and long. Phew! She let out a long sigh and finally looked relaxed. If there's also a sea outside the circle, Joan should be able to survive. Roland nodded. Thank you. Camilla seemed to want to say something more, but her body suddenly tilted and she fell to the ground. Nightingale caught her in time. She's probably just exhausted. Take her to the witch building to rest. I'll send someone to inform Tilly. Chapter 1153. When the sun gradually disappeared between the mountains, the whole plain was dyed with a layer of red clouds. This red was different from the red of the red mist. It was pure and clear. Whenever this happened, Osrook liked to stay high up and feel the distance between himself and the sky. Although he could fly higher, the disturbance of magic power would not only break the silence, but the dome that he could never touch would also increase the sense of distance. On the contrary, when he sat quietly, the golden clouds and the reddish-purple sky seemed only a step away from him. This was not a common experience. Most of the time, the top of his head was covered by the floating red mist. Although it made Osrook feel very comfortable, it also separated him from the sky by a thick layer of gauze. He was probably one of the few individuals that did not like to stay in the birth tower. But Osrook did not think that he was an anomaly. He was just more eager to embrace the source of magic power than others. That's right, the source came from the sky. Humans called it the Crimson Moon, which was quite appropriate. It was said that after obtaining all the inheritances, the race would welcome the final upgrade. The passage between heaven and earth would open and accept them into the sky. Without a doubt, the sky was a place that was vaster than the current world. Perhaps it was also the residence of God. At that time, they would be 100 times stronger than they were now, and their bodies would become immortal because of the surging magic power. As for this rumor, Osrook did not fully believe it. He had tried to use his own strength to fly into the deep sky. Unfortunately, when he could not replenish the red mist, he found that after reaching a certain height, he would encounter all kinds of obstacles, such as a sudden drop in temperature, freezing of his armor, difficulty in blood flow, difficulty in breathing, and so on. If he used magic power to resist the discomfort, the breathing tank on his back would soon be exhausted. The highest he flew was once, and he almost died on the spot. But it was also that attempt that deepened his desire for the sky. Because in the dark purple sky, he did see something, but when he thought about it later, it was difficult to describe. If he had to describe it, it was probably like a flash of scales. This also meant that the rumor was not groundless. At that time, he also heard a faint call. It sounded like a whisper, but also like a low murmur that echoed directly in his mind. Osrook knew that this was a sign that the realm of mind was drawing closer to him. Unfortunately, it was still a little bit away from the next level. Those who could open the gate of the two realms could be called great monarchs. Just as it closed its eyes to enjoy the warmth of the afterglow and the night breeze, it heard footsteps behind it. Sir Osrook, all the preparations have been completed. The person making the report was its junior guard. Very good, Osrook said without turning his head. Continue to monitor them. After the guard responded, he did not leave immediately. Instead, he said hesitantly, "But will those bugs really act according to our plan? They should have already fully understood your abilities. In order to set up this trap, we have paid a huge price. If His Excellency Sky Lord were to find out..." What you said isn't unreasonable, but I think it's worth it." Osrook opened his eyes and looked towards the south. Now that he was standing on the horn, he could already faintly see the black trail. In the 6 months of probing, many primal demons had died in front of the human camp, but they had never shaken the enemy's advance. The trail was like a root, growing slowly but tenaciously. This was the first time in his memory that the humans did not rely on the city wall to fight a head-on battle without being at a disadvantage. Although this method was laughably clumsy, and if it was in an area covered by the red mist, it would have countless ways to make the enemy pay a heavy price. But in this vast plain, it was unexpectedly difficult to deal with. Although the military strength at hand was one of the main reasons, even if the great monarch mobilized more troops for it, it would inevitably suffer heavy losses against the humans who had already gained a firm foothold. It had to strangle this budding army while it was still in its nascent stage. What do you think of the recent battles? Do you feel like it's difficult to move forward? The guard was silent for a moment. That's because we are fighting with our backs to the wall. No, it's the enemy who is forcing us to fight with our backs to the wall. Osrook corrected him. We have also built outposts in an attempt to further expand the supply range of the life floaters, but it didn't work as well as it did 400 years ago. This is because the humans now have a way to attack from a farther distance than the tombstone. Regardless of whether you see the enemy as a bug or not, you have to admit this. In addition, our every move is under the observation of the witches, so we feel like we are running into a wall. He paused, stretched out his right hand towards the black trail, and slowly clenched it into a fist. As long as we don't erect the birth tower, we can't change the situation. Therefore, I'm going to destroy their eyes and cut off their arms before they realize what's going on, so that they won't be able to play the same trick again, even if they have to pay the price of 2 horns. As he spoke, Osrook revealed a trace of a sinister smile, and surging magic power surged out, causing the surrounding air to tremble. He knew that at the end of the black trail, in the camp, someone was watching him. This action had probably alarmed the humans and caused them to be in a mess. I swear to follow you by your side. Feeling the surging power, the guard bowed his head respectfully. There was one more thing that Osrook did not mention. He felt that he was only a hair's breadth away from the next breakthrough. This battle might be an opportunity. After all, a bloody battle had always been the most effective way to improve. Even after becoming a king, he would not reject such a challenge. If he could cross that hurdle and become a new senior lord, then no matter what the Sky Lord thought, he would not be calculative with him. As for whether the humans would take action, Osrook was not worried. He had long experienced the greed of his opponents. As long as the bait was rich enough, they would not let it go easily. The sun finally set completely, and the last bit of its afterglow dissipated. The sky was completely shrouded in darkness, and there was only a faint starlight and darkness above his head. This scene seemed to overlap with the scene when he was sprinting towards the heavens. That day, he confirmed his desire. And now, he was approaching that goal step by step. What the humans were thinking was probably the same as him. In this competition that would decide one's fate, only the final victor would have the qualifications to reach that never-before-seen domain and come into contact with the origin of magic. He was full of anticipation for the impending battle. Chapter 1154. Just as Nightingale had said, Camilla looked so tired and weak mainly because of her mental anxiety. In just 2 days, she had recovered to her normal state, as if the moment of helplessness and confusion had never existed. Roland heaved a sigh of relief. Camilla's ability was very important for long-range ambushes. Even though the other party's gaze towards him was a little more guarded and distant compared to when they first returned, it made him feel a lot more natural. He knew that Butler was still worried about Joan, but he suppressed his uneasiness for the time being. She had a more important responsibility on her shoulders. Apart from Roland, Tilly, Anna, and Nightingale, no other witches, especially Lightning, knew about Joan's disappearance. Roland had heard a lot about the Neverwinter exploration group established by the little girl, and he knew that Joan was a member. Lightning and Maggie had formed the outermost perimeter of the First Army, and they had not left the battlefield for several months. It was not hard to imagine the pressure they were under. Moreover, Lightning had been injured by the Magic Slayer, so they could not afford to make any mistakes. Therefore, it was better to keep this kind of worrisome news a secret. In the following week, he repeatedly traveled between the third border city, the weapon testing ground, and the castle's conference room to decide on the final ambush plan. Since the Magic Slayer was much more agile and faster than the Devil Beasts, it was much more difficult to carry out the ambush plan. Roland had thought that he could finalize the plan in 2 or 3 days, but he ran into a lot of trouble during the simulation. Fortunately, this was a joint project, and with the cooperation of many parties, he finally came up with a feasible plan. A week later, the decision-making meeting was held in the underground hall of the third border city. Alethea was the first to speak. She manipulated the magic core and projected an illusion in front of everyone. The light curtain, which was several meters long, looked like a window hanging in the air, showing the scene behind the ruins of Tequila. Since the illusion was not a real window, they could not poke their head through it, so their field of vision was a little narrow. The five-colored stone could not be adjusted, so it was difficult to observe the surroundings. However, it happened to be facing the demon's only supply line, which provided a convenient and intuitive reference for planning an ambush route. This bloodline runs from northeast to southwest. Almost every day, there would be a team providing red mist to the demons stationed in the ruins. 10 months ago, when Lorger first discovered the demons and Ashes began to locate them, there were 3 teams. From this, it could be seen that the enemy had lost and the number of troops they had left since Operation Torch began. Since there was only one supply line, the senior demons wouldn't stray too far from it if they planned to retreat. Is there no way to disguise the bloodlines? Vendi was still a little worried. As long as the demons still need the red mist to survive, this is the most reliable information. Although she had answered similar questions many times before, Aletheia still explained patiently, they have indeed used the tactic of transporting a large amount of red mist to conceal the direction of the main attack, or carrying a large amount of red mist on their backs to carry out long-range attacks, but they have never compressed the demand for red mist to conceal the movement of the main force, because that would be suicidal. In fact, it's easy to understand, Agatha added. If the demons really have a method that doesn't rely on the red mist, they can bypass the frontline station and directly attack the interior of Grey Castle. Whether they attack from the Misty Forest or occupy the Hermes Plateau, they will pose a much greater threat to us. The obelisk made with the help of the god's stone mine is no longer a stronghold that they have to defend. Seeing that no one had any objections, Aletheia continued, the supply team is basically made up of modified siege beasts and a few mad demon guards. They pose no threat to the special operations team and the seagull, so the interception is mainly to guard against the devil beasts flying in the sky. As for the location, she pointed to Edith, I very much agree with this mortal's judgment. Let her speak. This is the result of the joint efforts of the General Staff and all of you. The Pearl of the Northern Region smiled. Of course, it's also inseparable from the map provided by Lightning and Miss Maggie. Please take a look at the report in your hands. The east side of the bloodline is almost flat, and the forest is very sparse. It's not suitable for the special operations team to hide, but it's an ideal view for the seagull. The west side is much more complicated. Not only is the terrain undulating, but there's also a small hill. Roland flipped open the report on the table. One of the pages was a simple map. Compared to the high-definition version that Soroya had explored, this map was undoubtedly much simpler. It was probably roughly drawn by Lightning in a very short period of time with Maggie while flying at high speed. Although it couldn't be used for precise tasks such as guiding the march or artillery strikes, it could at least give people a general idea of the situation behind the Tequila. The terrain on this side can only be seen a little through the Phantom instrument, so we need to use the map to fill in the gaps. And there are 3 locations that are more suitable for Miss Andrea to launch her shooting formation. From north to south, they are the top of the hill, the forest at the foot of the hill, and a raised foothill. The best place to shoot is the top of the hill, Roland said. Although the hill was not more than 100 meters high and looked more like a lump of earth from afar, it was still the highest point within 1,000 miles. For a sniper, there was nothing more important than vision. Shooting from a high place not only gave them a longer range, but also allowed them to catch the target flying close to the ground. Indeed, Miss Andrea said so too, Edith nodded. But this hill is quite far from the supply line. If the Seagull intercepts the Magic Slayer, the Special Operations team will have to travel a lot longer. Similarly, the top of the hill is not well hidden, and flying devil beasts can easily spot them. If something happens, the Seagull will not be able to rescue them. Most importantly, it's not within the range of the Phantom instrument. Roland pondered over the meaning of this sentence. You're worried about the demons? It's the only high point in the area where we can overlook the whole situation. If I were stationed there, I wouldn't be at ease if I didn't take precautions. Although Lightning said that the demons did not seem to be prepared, it's better to be cautious when it comes to a war involving magic power. For example, you set up the sigil of screaming at the source of the Redwater River. It can be used as an early warning even without troops stationed there. And the Special Operations Team's trump card is secrecy. If we're exposed, we won't be able to attack. To be honest, in the Union era, the most difficult thing to explain to mortals was magic power. Just then, Alethea's voice came into Roland's mind. Judging from the reactions of the others, it was undoubtedly a private message. The way they think is like they live in another world, and they rarely consider magic power. But this mortal is different. You have a few interesting people under your command. That's because you've never taught them seriously. Geniuses are always the minority. Education is the most effective way to improve the overall strength of a civilization. Roland replied naturally and then looked at Edith. So where did you choose? The jungle at the foot of the hill, Alethea said without hesitation. It has a narrow field of vision, but it's also good for concealment. We can shoot at targets in the air, and we can support Princess Tilly at any time. The foothills are closer and there's no lack of woods to hide in, but it's almost next to the Tequila ruins. If the enemy troops collapse and flee, they'll be easily affected. All in all, the forest in the middle doesn't have the best conditions, but the most balanced one. Roland asked. Chapter 1155. Roland naturally knew what the Pearl of the Northern region was referring to. The development of the god's punishment bullet had encountered many technical problems, such as the caliber of the bullet and the gun. Since the hardness of the god's stone was related to its size, it was necessary to enlarge it as much as possible. However, a larger god's stone would also produce a larger anti-magic field, and the weight of a large-caliber gun would inevitably have a negative impact on concealment, transportation, and usage. Over the past week, Anna, Agatha, Lucia, and Andrea worked together to solve the problem. After nearly 100 tests, they finally confirmed the data. To ensure a uniform force during firing, the god's stone of retaliation was processed into a cylinder with a width of 30 millimeters, and the outside was covered with a copper coat to form a sharp bullet. Therefore, the caliber of the bullet specially made for the Magic Slayer was an astonishing 35 millimeters, which felt like a small, heavy cannonball in one's hand. It was only at this size that the strength of the inner core was stable enough to not be shattered by the impact of the gunpowder. The lightless black hole, produced by the god's stone, was about 1.5 meters long, which meant that the gun itself had to be more than 2 meters long. Including the gun barrel, it was definitely outshone the rest. It was impossible to fit into the magic arc normally, so a disassembled design was necessary. At the same time, the increased caliber brought about a huge recoil, which made it impossible to use manual support like before. It had to be installed on a special stand to fire. Due to the above reasons, the final product looked extremely deformed. The shooter could not even reach the bolt, nor could he load the gun with his own strength. The weight of the entire gun in combat mode was almost equal to that of 2 adults, which indirectly reduced the number of people in the special task force. In addition, even with the muzzle brake and the gun frame as a buffer, the recoil could still injure the shooter. Fortunately, this new weapon was only intended to be used once, so it was not an unacceptable disadvantage. There were also benefits to the large caliber. The most obvious was the greatly improved range of the weapon. The effective range of a gun generally referred to the effective range. Bullets would still be lethal beyond this range, but because the trajectory was too erratic, it was impossible to determine the landing point, so it was worthless in actual combat. But for Andrea, the maximum range of a gun was the effective range. As long as the coin existed, she would be able to hit the target. This increased the theoretical range of the new weapon to more than 10 kilometers. Roland was beginning to understand why Edith had chosen the jungle. Compared to the anti-demon sniper rifle that Ashes could set up and fire, this weapon that could be called a cannon had to be assembled before it could be used, which greatly increased the preparation time. If they did not choose a secluded area, the risk of the plan would increase greatly. The last one is the retreat route. Edith pointed at the map and said, after the artillery attack on the Tequila, the First Army will send a unit to the left flank about 5 to 6 kilometers ahead to support the retreat of the Special Operations Group. As for when the ambush would begin, it would depend on the strength of the enemy's resistance. That is the gist of the plan. This plan, which had been discussed for nearly a week, was quickly approved by everyone. After some screening, the members of the two teams were also confirmed. The sniper team consisted of 5 people: Sylvie, Andrea, Camilla, Maggie, and Ashes. The first 4 could be said to be essential for the ambush, and the last protector was Ashes, who had the most balanced ability. The accompanying scout was Lightning. Compared to Maggie, her biggest advantage was that she could transport God's punishment bullets. As long as she was hung by a rope, the effect of the God's stone would not affect her. Otherwise, they would have to walk to the enemy's rear. The Seagull team consisted of 10 people, and the scout was Maggie. Except for Tilly and Vendy, the rest were God's punishment witches, led by Zoe. The team was smaller than expected, because the large-caliber shotguns, anti-demon grenades, and armor took up too much of the load, and this was under the condition that Hummingbird had half the weight. As for the frontal battlefield, there was not much to say. They just had to fight steadily and advance step by step. The whole plan made full use of all available resources, but it also made Roland feel the lack of transportation capacity. Without the support of inland rivers and railways, the First Army could only send a limited number of troops. If he had an armored unit, he would not have to go through so much trouble. He could have taken a detour, cut off the enemy's supply, and then launched a pincer attack with the main force. Even if the Magic Slayer wanted to escape, he would be trapped on the grassland due to the lack of red mist. At the end of the meeting, Edith stood up again. She looked at Roland and seemed to be hesitating. "Is there anything else?" Roland asked, raising his eyebrows. "When the battle begins, I hope you can temporarily enter the third border city and the city hall." Edith paused for a moment. "And of course, the witches in the castle district." "What do you mean?" Barav, who had not been able to get a word in, finally found an opening. "Are you going to order His Majesty around?" Anna was a little moved. "Do you think the demons might attack Neverwinter?" "It's not very likely, but I can't rule it out." Edith looked much calmer after she spoke. The bloodline represents the upper limit, but it can't be roughly equated with the enemy's strength. For example, the red mist can support 3,000 demons in battle, but it can also support 1,000 demons to travel a longer distance. Since they've come here once, they can come again. If this time, they don't come here to threaten or warn us, but directly to the castle district. If it's not an ordinary mad demon but a senior demon. There was a brief silence. "Even if we have to give up the tequila?" Agatha asked with a frown. "If it's inevitable that we'll lose, it's not about giving up. We'll just try to recover as much as possible." "I see." Roland smiled relaxedly. "Let's do as you say. Barav, you'll be in charge of the city hall. You know what to do, right?" "Yes, yes. Your Majesty." In fact, even if Edith did not mention it, Roland had planned to stay in the hall to watch the live broadcast. Although he could only see a corner of the tequila, it was still a rare opportunity. "Everyone, I know what you're thinking." Roland stood up. There was no doubt that after this meeting, those who had the mission would rush to the front line and participate in the decisive battle for survival. He knew that it was time for the final speech. "That's right. Victory is only one step away from us." Even though only a few people knew about this war, and even fewer knew its significance, there would be a day when it would be remembered by all of humanity. Before the Battle of Divine Will began, Grey Castle had taken the initiative to attack and keep the demons out of the fertile plains. Regardless of whether the demons are held up by the Sky Sea realm or not, the chances of victory will not be reduced. The only regret is that "I can't go with you." The hall was silent, but everyone's eyes shone with a dazzling light. "Defeat the demons and take down the tequila. I look forward to your fight." Roland looked around and said word by word. Chapter 1156. 2 days later, the seagull slowly landed on a simple landing field next to the forest terminal. As soon as Tilly got off the plane, she saw Ashes waiting for her at the side of the field. As usual, whenever the glider needed to land here, Ashes would always come to see her, even if it was only for a short time. Sometimes, Lin Sanjiu wondered if Ashes had completed the task of protecting Ashes that Roland had given her. Don't worry. When I'm not around, Leaf will enter the state of Heart of Forest. No one can hurt her in this state. And every time, she is the one who notifies you of our arrival. And Ashes would always answer like this. How long will you be here today? Ashes asked when the crowd had dispersed and only the two of them were left. Until tomorrow morning. Looking at the familiar smile in Ash's eyes, Tilly did not feel as relaxed as she had expected. After all, she had boasted in the meeting that I will persuade her myself, without any discussion, so she still felt a little guilty. Iron Axe and Edith will be accompanying me. Operation Torch is coming to its last step, so there are probably a lot of things to be done here. One night, Ashes seemed to be calculating. Then we can take a walk around the campsite. Leaf has planted a few experimental fruits, and they taste very good. In the evening, I will prepare a campfire and roast some game for you. Whenever she had time, she would always make arrangements like this, as if she did not want to waste a second. Not this time. There are a lot of things to prepare tonight. I'm afraid I won't have time. Ashes suddenly seemed to be depressed. She sighed and said, Okay. I understand. Tilly could not help but chuckle when she saw that the omnipotent extraordinary was in such a dejected mood. The anxiety in her heart also abruptly dissipated. But I'm not the one who's busy. It's you. After all, we'll be staying together for the next few days. You have to prepare well. Me? Yes, in order to intercept the demons, the special task force needs your participation. So, you have to pack your luggage tonight and set off for the front line tomorrow morning. Of course, take this seagull, she said with a smile. As for Leaf, Roland has also made arrangements. I will explain to her later. Ashes finally reacted. You could have told me this from the beginning. Tilly averted her gaze and ignored his protest. There's definitely not enough time to roast the game, but there should be no problem with trying some fruit. Do you want to take me there? Ashes immediately held out her hand. Of course. After dinner, when they returned to the camp, Tilly told her the battle plan made by the general staff. When it came to the sniping part, Ashes seemed to have already predicted her mission. But when it came to using the seagull as a backup, her expression suddenly became serious. Don't tell me that the person piloting the seagull is you. Tilly was silent for a moment and then looked into her eyes. I'm the most suitable candidate. But Roland promised me that he would take good care of you and never let you near the battlefield. Ashes stood up angrily. I have to confront him. He didn't agree. What? It's not Roland who agreed. Tilly took a deep breath. It's me. So, how do you think he will stop me? Tie me up or imprison me in the castle? Ashes was stunned for a moment. Of course, if it's a one-way trip, it's not impossible for him to do so. But as I said before, the seagull is just a backup. We will only intervene if Andrea can't finish the sniping. And all we have to do is to overtake the senior demon and release the god's punishment witches. Isn't that dangerous enough? You have to face the magic slayer. I knew you'd say that. Tilly interrupted helplessly. Did you think that we would keep pace with the enemy, overtake him, land right under his nose, and release the god's punishment witches? If not, what else can we do? Ashes frowned. The god's punishment witches can't fly. If we don't attract the enemy's attention and lure him into battle, this backup plan won't work at all. The most important part of luring the enemy was to show weakness so that the enemy would think that he could easily reap the victory. Otherwise, the magic slayer would only speed up his retreat, and placing himself as the bait was extremely risky. Fortunately, Edith isn't as simple-minded as you are. Tilly rolled her eyes. All the demon's actions are inseparable from the red mist, so we don't have to appear in front of them openly, nor do we have to use the seagull as bait. All we have to do is get rid of the enemy's supply team in advance. The Magic Slayer won't miss this opportunity. Otherwise, he won't be able to escape from this plane safely with only the gas tank he carries. In other words, the gods' punishment witches are simply waiting for the Magic Slayer to exhaust himself and force him to fight. The time difference will be enough for Vendi and me to return to safety. Ashes could not think of a rebuttal. After a moment of hesitation, she said, "But what if?" Tilly shook her head. "I'm not saying that this plan is absolutely safe, but it's risky. As I said, being the executor is part of the plan. Unless I'm as stupid as you, I won't put myself in danger. In fact, this is the main reason why I decided to come to the front. I can't rest easy if I don't keep an eye on you." "Your Highness." Ashes was stunned. "Say my name." However, before she could finish, Tilly had already grabbed her collar, pulled her down, stood on tiptoe, and kissed her on the lips. Ashes immediately felt a warm sensation. As far as she could remember, this was the first time that Princess Tilly had taken the initiative. After a while, Tilly pushed her away and slightly turned her head away. In the flickering candlelight, Ashes saw a slight blush on Tilly's face. Whether it was on Sleeping Island or in Neverwinter, every time you went on a long journey, I could only stay here and wait for you to come back. It could be a few days or it could be a few months. But it wasn't like this in the beginning. When we were in the Old King City, no matter where we went, we were together. Why did we have to be so careful now? Was there no risk at all when we were being hunted by the church?" Tilly paused for a moment and looked back into Ashes's eyes. This time, she did not look away. "I don't want to wait alone anymore." Through those gray eyes, the extraordinaire confirmed her will. "I see." Ashes let out a long sigh. In terms of persistence, the 4 members of the Wimbledon family were somewhat similar. "But I have a condition." "Don't force yourself. You have to prioritize safety when you encounter demons, right? Roland has already said that." "Really, I'm not a fool. I should be able to judge the situation properly." "That's not what I want to say." Tilly was slightly stunned. "One more time. That's my condition." You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.